3 presidential elections in a row, suddenly now want to be president, go straight for the top job on planet Earth. Your critics would say that's the epitome of tech bro arrogance. What is your response to them? I get that you're an outsider. Personally, I like outsiders. But what have you done that even qualifies you to be president of the United States?
So look, Mehdi, I have been taking on bureaucracies my entire life. I took on the bureaucracy of big pharma starting in my late 20s, at a time when I think pharma was corrupt and going in a lot of directions that they shouldn't have been. I actually built a multi-billion-dollar business developing medicines that pharma had abandoned. I took on the ESG bureaucracy, competing with firms like BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard to build a successful firm called Strive. Yes, none of that is in government, but it is in the private sector. It involves taking on bureaucracies.
Okay.
And that exactly is my mission here, is taking on the biggest bureaucracy of all, that in the federal government in Washington, D.C. And the other thing I'll add to that, Mehdi, is it's not just the outsider pitch. I think we do need an outsider. I think it's good to have a business background. But I'm also an outsider who deeply understands the law and the Constitution in this country. And I think that's the unique combination that actually makes this my calling. And I hope that we're going to be successful in reviving this country.
So you talk about your business background. Let's talk about that. You made your name and made a lot of your early big money from pushing an Alzheimer's drug that had already failed 4 clinical trials when you bought it. You then talked it up on CNBC, in Forbes, on the cover. Your company's subsidiary shot up by billions in value when it went public in 2015. But then the drug failed its phase 3 trial on your watch. The company lost 75% of its value in a single day. Ordinary investors like the California State Teachers Pension Fund lost hundreds of thousands of dollars. But you cashed out beforehand via your parent company to the tune of, I believe, over $37 million. Your critics say it's a classic pump and dump scheme. What do you say to them?
Yeah, Mehdi, that's the standard opposition research during politics reading line. Anybody in the biotech industry knows this story very well. 99.7% of Alzheimer's drugs have failed. That's thousands of drugs. Mine was one of them. But the company I founded, Roivant, developed a range of medicines. And the way I made my money was not through the failure of that Alzheimer's drug. This is one of the pieces of misinformation from opposition research. I could have sold shares in that subsidiary Alzheimer's company, but didn't. The person who was hurt by that was me.
Hold on.
But
you say this a lot, but you did sell shares in Roivant, and you made $37 million.
And Mehdi,
$37 million.
Mehdi, I think you owe it to your audience. Mehdi, I think you owe it to your audience to be accurate. That is shares in a different company, not Axovant. And those shares that I sold are worth. And those shares are worth dramatically more today. So I would have made more money had I held on to those shares. So don't believe what the opposition research purveys through the media.
It's not opposition research. We looked at your tax returns, which you very kindly have released.
Yeah, exactly.
And you
made voluntarily released because I want to be transparent.
You made $300,000 in 2014 on capital gains. In 2015, after the IPO of this Axovant, you made $37 million in capital gains. Yet others didn't make that kind of money.
After Mehdi, give me a break. After Roivant, the multi-billion-dollar business that developed 40-plus medicines, yes, I sold shares in that. And that business, if I may actually allow you to know how I made my money, developed 5 FDA-approved therapies that are now FDA-approved today.
After you sold
one
the
of them is a life-saving therapy in kids.
When you were CEO,
Another one, they were FDA. Actually, over the time that I developed them, we took them all the way through phase 3, and then we did a $3 billion deal that actually
they were approved a year and a half later after you sold the company.
Yeah, so Mehdi, I'm not going to fault you for not knowing the first thing about biotech because that's not your job. But getting through phase 3 is the final stage of clinical testing. Before you hand in the application, yes, my company did a $3 billion deal that actually did make money for those shareholders. And so, yes, I have built Roivant's a publicly traded company, nearly $10 billion public company today that I built as the sole founder from scratch as one of several companies that I've built. So, yes, I have a business record that I'm proud of and will equip me to lead this country.
You mentioned stage 3 trials. The Alzheimer's drug failed it after you did a lot of touting of it. You say 99.7% failed. You never said that at the time. Do you have any regrets about how you hyped that drug?
I did say that.
CEO of Roivant said this week that you hyped the drug. Do you regret hyping it?
We did not hype the drug. To the contrary, actually, one of the things that I found
this week.
Well, I can't speak for what is or is. I haven't read any article that you're quoting, so I don't exactly know what you're referring to. The fact of the matter is, though, I have been transparent at every step of the way. Everyone who is in the biotech industry knows that Alzheimer's disease is the graveyard for medicines. But I still think it's an important area of need. And I'll say this, Mehdi, is, you know what? If I serve for 2 terms, I'm still going to be in my 40s when I leave the White House. it is a personal passion of mine to come back and see if Alzheimer's disease hasn't been cured. I do want to play a role in still delivering treatments and cures for that disease. And people who don't take risks, don't achieve meaningful impact, the medicines that I did develop, I'm proud of. And you don't get there without having a number of medicines that you test along the way. And the other thing I will say is our success rate under my watch was higher than probably nearly 99.9% of biotech startups in the last decade. So yeah, I stand by that record. I'm not afraid of taking risks. That's part of the American spirit, and I stand by it.
Technically, the successes were a year and a half after you sold the company, but we'll get bogged down. Let's talk politics.
Mehdi, that's dead wrong, and I would sorry to say you're embarrassing yourself in front of anybody who knows anything about biotech for knowing that phase 3 trials are the final stage. The final stage, the FDA phase 3 studies succeeded. So you're barking up the wrong tree, but we can continue to move on.
Let's talk politics. Let's talk politics. We do. We want to talk lots of stuff. Sure. You're an advocate, your critics say, of fantasy politics, of magical thinking. They say you propose stuff that can't be done. For example, you said on Meet the Press the other week that if you had been in Mike Pence's place on January the 6th, you would have insisted on first passing a bill that night to bring in single-day voting on Election Day.
That's inaccurate.
Government
I never said that night. I never said that night.
What you would have done on January the 6th, and you said I would have done this. And
I said what I would have done differently is that I was precise about the period between, and this is still ambitious, I will admit, but at least let's get my view correct. It is ambitious. Between November 4th and January 6th, I think it was an opportunity for heroism.
Just to be clear, you never said anything
absolutely have
about
said it every step.
Let's play the clip. Guys, do we have the clip?
I've said this in countless forums.
Let's have a listen to the clip.
On your Chuck Todd spliced script, in all of my written statements and everything I've said,
hold on, we're playing the clip right now.
In that period, between the election, here's what I would have said. We need single-day voting on Election Day. We need paper ballots, and we need government-issued ID matching the voter file. And if we achieve that, then we have achieved victory, and we should not have any further complaint about election integrity.
So what would you have done
through the Senate?
So what would you have done with Mike Pence? You would have not certified the election?
So in my capacity as president of the Senate, I would have led through that level of reform. Then on that condition, certified the election results, served it up to the president, President Trump, then to sign that into law, and on January 7th, declared the re-election campaign pursuant to a free and fair election.
Not only do you not mention anything about November, but let's say you did do November. That joint session was not a legislative session. The vice president doesn't have the power to introduce legislation. Neither party would have backed such a bill.
Oh, come on,
and it couldn't have been passed in a day.
The fact of the matter is,
naive stuff.
The president and vice president absolutely drive legislation through Congress. That is exactly how things work.
Trump wasn't doing legislation.
Now,
he was busy pushing the big lie, as you pointed out yourself in your books.
Well,
so he wasn't
and
there.
I wasn't
Mike
the vice president of the United States.
Passed a bill, but
I was not the vice president of the United States. You guys in the media, you guys in the MSNBC crack me up to sort of create a hypothetical situation to say, if you had been vice president, what would you have been doing? I'm telling you exactly what I've been doing, but you're saying, but that's not what Donald Trump was doing. This is a joke. Let's actually have a substantive conversation. Do you want to have a substantive conversation about what should have happened, or do you want to play a game of gotcha? Because you have the choice. The choice is yours. Do you actually want to have a substantive converation? If you do, I'm down to do it. Do you want a substantive conversation? What we need.
You said substantive full time.
Actually, if you want to get a word in, you know, if you're going to speak the truth and ask a legitimate question, have at it.
I think it is a legitimate question. Multiple people wondered about your knowledge of how Congress works, suggesting Mike Pence, by the way, on the debate stage asked you if you would have supported what he did. It's not an MSNBC question. It's a Republican vice president question.
Yes.
So fine, you don't want to answer it.
And what I'm
you
saying
is
it was a missed opportunity for heroism, not in one day, but I think that in a period of 2 months. And I think you're a smart guy.
It couldn't have been done in a lame duck Congress. You're a smart guy. You know it couldn't have been done in 2 months.
I think under extraordinary circumstances, in extraordinary times, we have an American Confidence in Elections Act. It's literally making its way through Congress now. ACE. I support it. I think if we had gotten that done during that window, further we said single-day voting on Election Day as a national holiday.
And Mitch McConnell wouldn't have agreed to a national holiday.
I think Democrats should agree to it.
We can argue forever.
I think Democrats should agree to it.
That's a different
argument. That's what I stand for. I think we're still going to get that done when I'm the president.
Okay.
When I'm the president, not in some fantasy land where I was vice president in some other year in the historical history.
Let's talk about you as president.
Actual, what I'm running for,
Understood.
This is what we're going to do.
Let me ask a question so we don't run out of time. Please don't filibuster. I just want to ask a question about when you're president, you say you said this is your words, quote, if you want to stay out of no-win wars and make America stronger at home, I know how to get that done. Genuine question,
Yes.
Vivek, not a gotcha. How? How do you know how to get that done? With respect,
Yes.
You've literally never done anything like that in your life. I could go out on the street outside the studio, grab someone. They have as much experience as you do of keeping us out of foreign wars. That's not an insult. That's just a statement of fact.
No, it's not an insult. It's a fact, right? And it is also a fact that everybody else who does have experience in the foreign policy establishment has been sending us into no-win wars for a long time. Both of those are facts. Here's how I would do it. Let's get specific, and I'm glad we finally gotten to the doorstep of actually discussing a policy agenda. Here's what I would do. Pull Russia apart in its military alliance with China. Those two countries are in a military treaty dating back to 2001. That is the single greatest threat that the United States faces. So I would end the Ukraine war on terms that, yes, allow Ukraine to at least come out with its sovereignty intact, which may not even be the track they're on right now. But in return, and also make a commitment that NATO will not admit Ukraine to NATO. In conjunction, and by the way, for people in the foreign policy establishment, they forgot that Gorbachev was made that promise by James Baker in the United States in 1990. So keep our word there, but in return, actually make a hard requirement that Vladimir Putin exit his military alliance with China and remove his Russian military presence from the West. That's the deal that I would do.
Again, the fantasy land is worry with you. Why? Because you asked nicely, Putin will hold his word. He'll pocket your concessions and not just carry on dealing with his biggest trading partner, China.
Well, here's the thing. I actually think that China shouldn't be his biggest trading partner. I think it's a mistake that we've closed off economic relations with Russia. I would lead both the United States and the West to reopen economic relations with Russia because Putin does not enjoy being Xi Jinping's little brother. Mehdi, you're a smart guy. Look at what he's done. He's actually sent weapons to both India and Vietnam right after the February 2022 meeting he had with Xi Jinping. There are cracks in that armor, but we need to actually open our eyes to see the opportunity staring us in the face.
We will have to agree to disagree whether we think that you can persuade Vladimir Putin to drop his alliance with Xi Jinping. You have made truth the centerpiece of your campaign. So let's talk about your trustworthiness.
Yes.
For example, when CNN quoted you talking to The Atlantic about 9/11 and federal agents possibly being on the planes, you said the quote is wrong, actually. But the quote wasn't wrong. The Atlantic released the audio of what you saying exactly what they said you said. Let me finish the question.
Let me be crystal clear.
Let me finish the question.
The Atlantic should release the whole tape. They've refused to do it. Yep.
You said on Twitter Spaces last month that no, you had never supported Bernie Sanders' mask for all legislation, but you literally put out a tweet in July of 2020 calling it a sensible idea. You also said not once but twice in June and July that the first time you'd ever voted was in 2020 for Trump, but in fact the first time you voted for president was in 2004 for a pro-choice libertarian candidate. How can people believe what you say?
So, Mehdi, let me just go through one by one. The Atlantic, yes, purposefully spliced an out-of-context quote where we have challenged them. They released the tapes. We asked them for the tapes first. They didn't give them to us. They waited then to splice them and release them publicly. I challenged the Atlantic to release that entire conversation. And what was a conversation about how many federal agents were in the field.
You said was wrong. We all heard it. We can play it if you like.
No,
it is exactly word for word what she quoted to you. You said they put words in your mouth.
Look, if you want hard facts, here are hard facts. That day, the Atlantic printed it. I said, that looks like something that never captured the character of our conversation. Can you ask Atlantic for the tapes? They said they would refuse to release the recording to us. So when Caitlin asked me about it, I said, that does not at all sound like the context of what I said. And then, it turns out the Atlantic releases a very, everybody should listen to it.
You're putting words in my mouth.
It functionally sends the wrong message, Betty.
Oh, functionally. Okay. You could have said it's out of context.
It was so badly taken out of context that it misled their audience. It was so badly taken out of context, it was basically a lie and it misled their audience. But ask the Atlantic to release it. So my view here is, here's what I've learned is the media distortion filters. Mehdi, if they are going to cut something before and after without the question of what the guy is that came beforehand, come on, why wouldn't the Atlantic? Why are they so reluctant to release the whole recording?
Maybe
ask
because the audio they released, you're still denying you said what's on the audio. Okay, let's ask you this question. Is Donald Trump,
it's a joke that the media is going to selectively edit this, and this is the way this game is played. Politics is dirty, that's okay, I'm ready for it. It's not edited,
just to be clear. Is Donald Trump, as you say now, the best president of the 21st century?
Of the 21st century, yes, he was.
Let me ask my question. Let me finish the question. Is Donald Trump, as you say now, the best president of the 21st century, who you say you want as an advisor and a mentor if you become president? Or is Trump, as you've said in the past, in your books, on Twitter, a, quote, sore loser who is a, quote, danger to democracy and who did, quote, downright abhorrent and egregious things on January the 6th? Which one is he, Vivek?
So to be crystal clear, between George Bush, Barack Obama, Joe Biden, and Donald Trump, Those are the presidents of the 21st century. Donald Trump is unambiguously, as judged by the results, the best president of the 21st century. Kept us out of wars, grew the economy. I give him full credit for that. I want to build on that foundation and take this country to the next level.
You've also called him a sore
loser. Does that mean I would have
who is
made
a danger to democracy? Those are strong words.
Would I have made the same judgments that he has made at every step of the way? No, I will remind you that I am running for U.S. president because I am best positioned to lead this country forward.
Can I ask you what they are, Vivek?
Yes.
You say he behaved in downright abhorrent behavior that makes him a danger to democracy. What was it that was downright? Tell me what he did that was downright abhorrent.
Let's actually be really fair to your audience. So on January 10th, 2021, thereabouts, days after that incident, I wrote an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal arguing that censorship was the real cause of what happened on January 6th. When asked in response, somebody asked me the question, are you... That's what I wrote. I'm giving you the facts of what I said. That's a hard fact. That was published in the Wall Street Journal. When pressed on, was that condoning what Trump did? My answer was no. There's a difference between a bad judgment and a crime.
And
we
you're
need
avoiding
to be
my
able
question.
to tell the difference in this country.
What did Donald Trump do,
no, I'm not avoiding
in your view, that was downright abhorrent? Second time I
think that the thing that I would have done differently if I were in his shoes
not what I asked,
is
Vivek,
I would have
respect.
declared re-election on
That's
January 7th.
I'll ask it a third
That's exactly the thing I would have done.
What did Trump do that was egregious, quote, downright abhorrent, and a danger to democracy? Can you just explain to our viewers? Your words.
So you're mixing two different quotes. But what did I think was reprehensible about what happened that day? Look, I think that the way a true leader should have handled that situation should have been to actually say, this is me running for re-election, not actually litigating what is already passed and behind us. And I would have done things differently. That is not a crime, though, what he did.
I understand.
And the reason I have been so vehement...
You keep saying what you would have done. I just want to hear from your mouth. No, unless you're scared of him, why won't you say what he did that was downright abhorrent?
I'm not going to let you... stitching together three things from three different places to create a caricature. Do you want to have an actual conversation?
Yes, I want you to answer my question, Vivek. Three times I've asked it.
What
did Trump do that was downright abhorrent? It's a simple question. It's your words. It's on screen. What did he do that was downright abhorrent?
I believe that failing to unite this country falls short of what a true leader ought to do. That is why I'm in this race, is to do things differently than any prior president has done them. That's the hard truth, okay?
And that's what made him a sore loser and abhorrent.
The media
your words.
and well, the reality is none of that is a crime. And the reason I have been so vocal, the reason I have been so vocal is because when somebody actually prosecutes somebody for a bad judgment, and I've been clear,
I understand your objections to the litigation.
I would have made different judgments.
That's not what I asked about. I understand.
That is a distinction we have to draw.
Understood. You say you are anti-identity politics, anti-affirmative action in a party that hates the Soros name, yet you accepted a Paul and Daisy Soros scholarship at law school that was specifically set up for the children of immigrants. It was an affirmative action scholarship. And your defense for that is that you didn't have the money to pay for law school, even though you'd already made over $1 million at the time and made another $2 million.
My defense of that is somebody gives you a merit scholarship at the age of 24, you take it. At the age of 24, somebody gives you a merit scholarship, you take it. I didn't say I didn't have the money. I said at a time when I had a lot less money than now. $50,000
you said exactly I didn't have the money, Vivek. You keep forgetting your quote. You said when I didn't have the money.
So, Mehdi, I've made this really easy for everybody, and I did this in the early weeks of the campaign. I released 20 years of tax returns.
Yes, you
something that no presidential candidate, let alone somebody who's successful in business, has done. I challenge Democrats and Republicans alike, including the Biden family, to do it.
And you
know what? I released it so that you could look at them, so we can have an honest conversation.
And I appreciate that.
The funny thing I've learned,
I do appreciate that. It's something Trump should learn from you.
I think that transparency is important. So it's already open and everybody can see it.
Exactly. We have 2009.
But the fact of the matter is, you know what I would advise every 24-year-old should take
2009 and 2010. You made $750,000. You had the money to pay for law school. You didn't need a Soros affirmative action scholarship that you now criticize.
I mean, none of this is worthy, but if you think it is, let's get to the detail. That was actually the first big piece of money.
You say you're anti-affirmative action. You took a scholarship for immigrants.
I'm anti-affirmative action.
So why did you take a scholarship for the children?
Which falsehood would you like me to address? The financial one or the one about my views on affirmative action? Because I can go in whichever order you'd like.
Did you not make $750,000?
On the financial piece of it. Not at the time that I had applied for the scholarship that fall.
Yes, you did.
That December.
Yes, you did, Vivek. This is awkward for you because you did. I've got the tax returns in front of my face.
No, it's not awkward for you. Yes, on December 31st, when the application for the scholarship was that October. Mehdi, you're wasting your time on childish details. In October of that year, when I applied for that scholarship, And it was, well, guess what? The bonuses that a hedge fund pays, and it's a shame that, again, you don't have to be an expert on this, but if you're going to spout out, you better know something about it. People pay at a hedge fund the bonuses at the end of a year, and on December 31st, that's when I was paid. I applied for the scholarship that September, and I did not grow up in a wealthy family.
Vivek, you made more money the previous year.
I made $200,000 pre-tax or whatever it was.
No, you didn't.
And you know what? I believe.
Hold on. No, you didn't. You're now telling flat. In 2009,
you have my tax returns in front of you. I don't remember what I made in 2009.
In 2009, you made $650,000. In 2010, you made less, $450,000. So the argument that you only made the money pre the scholarship, Oh, so now we're bringing tax into it. We've been using gross numbers.
Absolutely.
Vivek, you're wrong on this. Go back and check your tax returns.
You made $750,000 makes a big difference.
And then you accepted a Soros scholarship for $50,000 when you didn't need it.
Well, you know what the fact is, Mehdi, is $50,000 did make a big difference to me back then. And anybody who has a few $100,000 in the bank is going to take $50,000 without strings attached. Take the scholarship. But my question for you is, why on earth are you, as an intelligent person interested in politics, obsessing over a 24-year-old $50,000 scholarship?
I'm interested in truth,
beneath
Vivek.
you.
We have a country to fix. That you wear. I'm interested in truth.
And Mehdi, that's why I released 20 years. Mehdi, that is why I released 20 years of tax records. Tell your friends in the Biden administration to do the same thing. Tell your Democrat candidates to do the same thing.
We've gone over time.
We're breaking precedents, and I think it is pathetic. I just think it is sad and pathetic that we have important issues to talk about for the future of a country, and you're talking about a $50,000 scholarship in 2010 to go to Yale Law School when I was 24.
If you just owned
this is pathetic. It is why nobody trusts you guys.
It is pathetic in your view, but you paid a Wikipedia editor who then removed it. So clearly it's something you didn't want people to read about. Last question, because we've gone over time and I respect you.
Who also said I was born in India. Who also said I was born in India and misspelled and got my wife's name wrong. So yes, we actually need to correct facts when people are playing this game.
Last question. You want me to ask a substantive question? Here's what I worry about most. Democracy in this country.
I would love substantive
questions. Not just under Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Last question for you. Not just under Donald Trump, but under you, people are worried about authoritarianism. You have preemptively promised to pardon Trump no matter what juries of his peers decide, as well as today extending those pardons to January 6 rioters. You've dismissed white supremacists as boogeymen and unicorns. You want to fire at least half the federal government workforce. That's over 1 million people. You want to remove the right to vote from 18 to 25-year-olds. That's over 30 million people. You want to get rid of birthright citizenship. In fact, you refer to voting and citizenship as privileges when they are, in my view and in the Constitution's view, rights. It's a very anti-democratic worldview. What do you say to people who criticize you for that?
I don't think it's an anti-democratic worldview. I favor reviving the lifeblood of our constitutional republic. Revive actual free speech and open debate in this country. Revive civic duty in this country, something that our founding fathers envisioned. Revive true equality in front of the law, where people aren't prosecuted because of the color of their skin or because of the content of their political views. One standard of the rule of law for everybody. I stand for the founding vision of the country, where the people who we elect to run the government ought to be the ones who actually run the government, when in fact most policymaking functions in D.C. are performed by federal bureaucrats. So yes, my standard is, would Alexander Hamilton and John James and Thomas Jefferson and George Washington, would they be proud of what they see today, or would they be appalled? I think if they walked around and saw Washington, D.C. today, they would be appalled. By the time I leave office in January 2033 after 2 terms, they will once again be proud of what we've created, a government with 3 co-equal branches, not 4, shutting down that administrative state, reviving civic duty, and reviving one standard of the rule of law for all Americans. And that is not a Democratic vision or a Republican vision. That is a pro-American vision that I think can actually reunite this country, which is what I believe I will uniquely be able to deliver as the next president.
How was dinner with your family and Ronna McDaniel last night?
It was well. She said she refused to pay the bill because she's not. I'm not going to get another cent from the RNC.
Yeah,
can you believe this? Legally, you think about your duty is not your money. Yeah. It's not your money, right? And I don't know if people, you think people know what we're already
This is the story you're talking about right here.
Yeah. So just so people, if they didn't watch the debate the other night or whatever, I am a believer in accountability. That this woman is appointed chair of the RNC, Republican National Committee, in 2017. Let's just do the math. It's not that complicated. 2018, loss. 2020, loss. 2022, no red wave. 2023, bad trouncing. Insanity is expecting a different conclusion unless you're going to make a change. This is the person who's running the Republican National Committee. So that had happened the night before the debate, the 2023 trouncing. I went on stage and said, nobody else, every other candidate's supposed to delicately tiptoe around the genteel norms of the RNC. And it's not like I surprised her with this. We actually, I haven't talked about this before. We had a debate walkthrough. You kind of go through in the morning of. I'm not making this up. I wish there was no cameras around in there. We can catch this. She comes in. She's just like trying to give me a hug. I'm like, I'll give you a handshake. And I was just like, how are you doing? And she's like, how are you doing? I was like, not great. The election didn't go very well last night. She's not great given last night. And I'm not even kidding you. Here's what she says. What happened last night?
Oh my God.
No, I'm not kidding. I thought she was joking. I'm just like, she's like, no, but seriously, what happened last night? And then she got kind of combative about it.
Who's around when this is happening?
Oh, like people from NBC, other like staffers from the Republican Party.
She came to want to give you a hug. You said, I'll give you a handshake.
Yeah. I said, I'll give you a handshake.
Have you guys had any feud prior to this or no?
No, but I believe in, well, we have, not multiple actually. Because it's not personal, it's the failure of how she leads this party. I mean, number one, at the start of this race, I said release the debate stage criteria so you don't play games later. I believe that played a role, and she was just like, no, but they actually released it earlier than they did last time around because I believe I called on them to. So they released it at least earlier. So I gave credit where credit was due when they at least responded. First, she was like, no, we're not going to do it. We're staying radio silent. But I believe I had an impact on that, and I gave credit where credit was due. So that loop was closed. Then Fox calls me after the second debate and Chris Christie and say, hey, would you spar with Chris Christie or have a open dialogue, since the second debate, I mean, the unspoken reality is that was useless. So I said I would do it. The night before, Ronna McDaniel calls me on my cell phone and says, you will be disqualified from the next debate if you participate in this discussion with Chris Christie. I said, Ronna, how does this advance the interests of the GOP? Like GOP voter base. How is the GOP voter base better off if we hear less debate between the candidates? Explain that to me. She has no good explanation, but regardless, that raised some of my recent sparring with her in public. But this has nothing to do with me and her. What happened on the night before the debate was the Republican Party nationally got trounced. And everybody, if
destroyed. Kentucky.
Totally destroyed. Everybody. Virginia, I mean, Ohio, you just go, these are red states, okay? Oh, Kentucky and Ohio, certainly. And so I'm walking in, this is the morning after that trouncing. This is the chairwoman of the Republican National Committee. She's coming, she's like, hey, how are you? I'm like, I'll give you a handshake. She's like, how you doing? I said, not that well, given that last night didn't go very well. She said, what happened last night?
Like oblivious.
Is she saying it jokingly?
No, she's saying it almost angrily, right? Because I was like, last night didn't go well. So she's challenging me. She says, well, what happened last night?
Oh, okay.
Like, what happened last night? I don't know what happened last night. Tell me what happened last night. Yeah. And I'm just like, this is the person who's accountable for running the Republican Party. I said, we lost the election. She said, we have nothing to do with that.
Really?
I run the National Party. These are state races. We have nothing to do with that. So where's and then says and then starts to like escalate her voice and says, I refuse to fall on the sword for this one. I refuse to fall on the sword for this one. This is not my fault. And it's like, clearly she's been criticized.
How many minutes before
this.
you hit the stage is this happening?
Oh, this is like early. This is in the morning, right?
Okay,
like
pre-game prep. Yeah,
you kind of go through. They show you where you're going to be standing. Here's your microphone. So that's where this happens. So it's not like I surprised her on the stage.
Got it.
All right, she knew where I'm at on this.
She had already had a long morning with this topic.
Oh, of course, and should. I mean, 2018 loss, 2020 loss, 2022 no red wave, 2023 trouncing, total drubbing for the Republican Party. This is the individual who's the national chairwoman. She runs the entire Republican National Committee. Where's the accountability? So I get on stage, and you're getting some standard, beaten dead old horse Donald Trump question. I said, forget that. Let's talk about what happened last night, because the last two elections he's been out, Republicans have gotten trounced for different reasons. So stop blaming Boogeyman. There's an accountability problem within the Republican Party. And so I say on stage that Ronna McDaniel, if she wanted to come up on stage, and I meant it, if she did want to come up on stage, debate stage time is valuable, but I would still yield my time to her if she wants to use the microphone, look the American people in the eye, and say she resigns, which would be good for the Republican Party, and I believe she should resign. What does she say? So then the press reports there's people apparently sitting in her row or behind her row in front of her, where she is. Think about this, the neutral arbiter of the Republican National Committee later in the debate when I'm sparring with other candidates, booing when I'm speaking, clapping against other candidates when they're speaking against me. So
she was booing?
Yeah,
who was booing?
She's booing me at other points in the debate. And I don't care about that, but think about your dereliction of duty. Yeah. You're supposedly the neutral arbiter of the entire National Republican Party hosting a debate. It's like a referee cheering in the middle of a game between two teams. It doesn't make sense. Like if the referee is like booing or hollering in favor of one team or the other, that's what that looks like if she's the arbiter. Then she's saying during the breaks, and this is as reported by the press, so I wasn't there, but it's apparently sources who are around her, reported by multiple sources in the press, saying that I would not get another cent from the RNC.
Yep.
So think about what that means. That means she believes that's her money, right? These are donations she's collected from other people, but somebody said a mean thing about her, and it's not even a mean thing about her. Someone said that we need accountability in the Republican Party, that this person who has failed us 4 times in a row, that there needs to be some accountability. She says, if he says that about me, then this money that I have been a steward for, a fiduciary for, that I'm not going to give a cent to him because he said something that I didn't like about me. That's a conflict of interest. So then I get a question after the debate in the press room. I don't know who it came from, but I'm presuming it's from one of the RNC-aligned people, which is, how come you would go on Rana's stage, on her stage is what they said, on her stage and criticize her like that? My response is, that's not her stage, and that's the problem with this party. It doesn't belong to these corrupt establishment political creatures. It belongs to the voters and the people of this country, and that's where the Republican Party is badly mixed up.
Question for you.
And so no, dinner didn't go well.
I assume you know her last name, her maiden name.
Romney.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. I think she embodies it.
Let me ask a question. When she says you can't, go debate Christie, then how is she okay with DeSantis debating Newsom?
Because it's corruption, man.
You think that's what it is?
Absolutely, it's corrupt. Because the people who are propping up Ron DeSantis, like the super PAC money, all of that's doing up. And it's not criticizing Ron or not criticizing. It has nothing to do with it. It's just the system is, there's tens and tens of millions of dollars in a system where supposedly the max you can give to a campaign is $3,300. The people who have lobbied and gotten their special favors from, and it's not just Ron, it's the way politics works, that those people are the big donors to the Republican Party. And Ron is debating another candidate who's running for U.S. president, that is called Gavin Newsom, and the man who's running for U.S. president, flying around doing. The funny thing about this is Gavin Newsom is not running for U.S. president in the same way that Ron DeSantis was not running for U.S. president, jaunting around on public money and private jets on matters that have nothing to do with the state. That's what Gavin Newsom is doing now. And as I said on the debate stage as well, to the Democratic Party, I call it Republicans, Democrats evenly. I call Democrats more. Be honest, Joe Biden's not going to be the nominee. So who's it going to be? Put up whichever other person it's going to be so we can have an honest debate. But Ron is able to have that full-on debate on the same network, Fox. But if they're calling me, I think what happened is at a certain point in the race, around late summer, initially they're saying, oh, yeah, young guy, okay, check the box. We got, a lot of boxes he checks for us. We get to say that this guy ran in the Republican Party, young guy, different generation, first generation, whatever. Okay, we check that box. Oh, wait, he's not going away when he's supposed to, right? The other no-name candidates, and I was initially a no-name candidate too, the other no-name candidates had no chance of making the first debate. They're all off. Nobody really paid attention to them. Wait, this guy's sticking around. And then, wait, he's saying some things that the establishment that has an allergic reaction to Trump, wait, he sounds a little bit like that. This isn't supposed to happen again. No, stop it. Okay, it was cute while it lasted. Like, make it stop. That's sort of where they were. And so I think there has been a concerted effort amongst the donor establishment class that has convened private summits with the Haley campaign, the DeSantis, the Scott campaigns, Pence and others, Christie. I'm the only person other than Trump that's not, invited to these closed-door forums. There's certain debates we want Ron DeSantis to get his airtime. You do it, we're going to disqualify you from the next debate. And then you get to the place where now, if you're critical of that party, she says, we're not going to use that she, because she doesn't like what I said, it's a personal conflict of interest, is going to say you don't get another cent from the RNC. So in a certain sense, they prove my point about the corruption, to say that they view this as their money, to treat it in a way that they're going to pick whoever their favorite horses are.
Yeah, that's very strange because the voter, I'm sitting there saying, and I even asked the governor, I said, why are you debating Newsom? I think a year ago made sense. I think right now makes no sense for the two of you guys to debate. But Rob, do you have the clip of Ronna McDaniel being confronted about what Vivek said and what her response is? And she said, I'm not the one running for president. Play this clip if you could.
There were allegations that were thrown on the stage by one of the candidates in particular, arguing that the Republican Party has a culture of policing. Specifically, Vivek Ramaswamy called for you to resign. Would you like to respond to that?
I'm going to focus on beating Joe Biden. I wish that's what all the candidates did. I'm not running for president. I'm very proud of the fact that under my tenure, we won back the House. We now are getting investigations into the Bidens. I also, as Michigan chair for the first time in 30 years, won a state that Democrats hadn't been in. I'm very proud of the fact that we're going to have staff in 15 states heading into 2024. But, I'll leave other people to attack Republicans. I'm going to focus on Democrats. I will say this. We can't attack each other and win. We need all of us.
So actually,
you can pause it at this point.
I have a comment on that,
which
is really funny. I hadn't seen this interview. I saw a different interview she did on Fox or Fox Business, where literally that was yesterday morning. She's going on air, national conservative audience, and literally just stated as a fact that Vivek voted for Obama.
Oh yeah, that's right.
100. I just confirm it for you. 100% false. Never voted for Obama in my life. So you have the chair of the RNC saying, "I'm not going to criticize the Republicans," and then go on national TV, say one of the Republican presidential candidates who you were booing in the middle of the debate. Oh, you have that one?
It's 11 seconds. You can play the clip.
Oh, you guys
I texted it to you.
You guys already, yeah.
There's footage of
maybe
her
I saw it after you actually. So that was press reports of people who were sitting in her row commenting on the fact that she said that there's going to be not 1 cent to me from the RNC, fiduciary violation.
This money thing situation, this not 1 cent, how does it actually get divvied up? Because you're the only candidate out there that has made their money as an entrepreneur. So you don't need their money.
To tell you the truth, I have no idea how the hell all of this sausage making works because I've basically said screw the system. Now, what does that cost me? 8-figure sums of my wealth that we're putting into this campaign. 15, 16 plus million bucks already, putting in millions more. It's going to be tens of millions of dollars, certainly by the time we're done. We're going to stop at nothing. But that's the cost of saying screw you to a corrupt system that otherwise wants you to behave like their circus monkey, which I refuse to. But the point is, this is a person who's running the RNC, managing other people's money, and saying that because you said something I don't like, I'm not going to give you 1 cent, then goes on national TV and spews. I mean, it's just a straight up factual falsehood, right? Vivek voted for Obama. Is it false? Yes, it is. Is it damaging? Yes, it is. Is it done with malicious intent for the person who was booing at me and saying those things? Yes, it was. Now, am I going to go after her because I have better things to do in my life? Probably not, right? But this is corrupt stuff.
Well, in the first debate,
play this real quick because it's 11 seconds. Go ahead, Rob.
I know Vivek's kind of newer to the party. He voted for Obama, so he may not know that.
Look at her. She just flat out says I voted for Obama. It is a lie. I mean, look at this woman. Yeah. Bold-face, getting up there, loses 4 elections for the Republican Party, pathetically going up, literally just looking the American voters, Republican voters in the eye, and telling them a bold-faced lie. I mean, you just play that. I just want people to hit clip again because I don't want that I'm putting words in her mouth.
I know Vivek's kind of newer to the party. He voted for Obama, so he may not know that.
I mean, this is that is a lie. This woman with an iota of basis.
Is there a way to prove that so she loses?
Yeah, actually, there's a way to prove it.
Okay.
He has voting record,
the fact that the voting record. So actually, I was so disillusioned, and I've talked about this. I voted Libertarian when I was young in my first election. Then I got so disillusioned from politics that it's actually public record that in both of those, I don't like John McCain, and I didn't like Barack Obama, and I didn't like Mitt Romney, and I didn't like Barack Obama. So I actually didn't vote in those elections. I sat him out. I'm not particularly proud of that. I was in my 20s. I understand why many people are disillusioned from politics. I was disillusioned back then too. I voted for the Libertarian candidate back in 2004, and then I basically said, "Screw this. This is I have better things to do with my life. I'm going to be an entrepreneur. I could care less about politics." Yeah. But then came back around to it later. But literally, that is now public record, actual false lie.
Yep.
Flat, bold-faced lie to the American people, say they won't give money. And so that proves the corruption. So that's the Ronna McDaniel corruption. But then I decided when I was on stage, okay, I'm wasting too much time on this stuffed suit of a bureaucrat running the RNC. Let's focus on the real problem, which is the equivalent, the Ronna McDaniel of media. There's many of them. Kristen Welker, sitting right there from NBC News. And there's a connection between the two because who decides to put up the Kristen Welkers of the world to moderate a Republican debate? It's none other than the RNC, the failed establishment that Ronna McDaniel has run that's lost its last 4 major cycles relative to what it was supposed to do. So it's almost proof sitting on that stage.
Vivek, back to the money question.
I don't know if people saw the rest of that. So that's why, I mean, it was almost, they're repeatedly proving my point based on the kind of debate they were hosting and the moderators they hired, to the things she's saying in the audience during the debate, to booing me during the debate, to now saying that false things on national television. Who do you think
would be a good RNC? Who would be a good RNC?
It's a good question. Yeah, so so let's you want to brainstorm this.
Kirk said you would be somebody like you would be very good.
So Kirk said look, I'm in this to be the president of the United States. Right. And I think that I can lead the country best from that position. But Charlie said that about me.
Yeah.
Well, I'll return the compliment to him. I think he could actually do a good job of it.
Kirk
I don't think it's crazy. I don't think it's crazy, actually. I mean, he's from a different generation.
They would not let him do it.
I mean, that's almost a credential. So whoever they shouldn't let do it, that should be a requirement for whoever does do it to actually get put in that place. I mean, Harmeet Dillon, very good. She ran against Ronna McDaniel. She's competent. She's a lawyer. She understands, and I think the lawyer thing helps because there's an element to running the elections in a way that's competitive, that you make sure it's actually run fairly for the Republicans to be able to compete. So Harmeet Dillon has a good background. There's this guy, Scott Pressler, who's, I don't know if he's a Republican activist. He's nowhere on the radar of the Republican National Committee, but he's a guy I've gotten to know, talked to him from time to time, tried to be very helpful in some of the other elections that have played out in the last couple of years, but a grassroots activist that has actually focused on the way elections are run. So Scott Pressler, Harmeet Dillon. I mean, these are all good people. I mean, I assume Charlie wasn't serious when he suggested me, but I would say in the similar spirit.
I saw somewhere him saying, by the way, did you have, there's a video of you talking to somebody. Were you talking to her or no? At the end of the debate, that's somebody else.
To my knowledge, I haven't talked to Ronna since after the debate. There's a lot of people piling in, so if she was in that throng screaming something senselessly.
So if you like this clip and you want to watch another one, click right here. And if you want to watch the entire podcast, click right here.
Joining us now, a frequent guest on Fox News, Republican presidential candidate and tech entrepreneur, Vivek Ramaswamy. We are happy to have you on. I'm going to talk to you more than just about Fox News, but good morning to you. Thank you for joining us.
Glad to be here.
What do you make of this decision to settle this case?
I mean, it strikes me as a cost of doing business. If you're going to be a news network, I think it's happened to CNN. I think it's happened to a lot of news networks.
That has not happened to CNN.
This has not happened to CNN. This
never been sued for defamation. Never been actually settled.
This is the largest.
It's definitely large, and Fox appears to have the largest viewership and the market capitalization. So I'm not familiar with the details of this case. I'm actually more interested in issues relating to this country than disputes with media companies. But I will say that it strikes me that from
But you're not familiar,
honest.
You're not familiar with the case. You're not familiar with the lies about the 2020 election, about the election being stolen, that Dominion was somehow fixing the votes. That's why they $787.5 million. You're not familiar with that? And you're running for president?
The details of a private dispute between a commercial dispute and the details of what the dollar figures are, that's not where I spend. That's really not where I spend my time. But what I will say is, look, there's defamation cases. People settle businesses. If you settle business disputes, Fox settled this one. It's actually not, I think, the pressing issue for the nation of what Fox News' settlement is.
I disagree with that because as you just admitted, you said Fox is the largest viewership, one of the largest viewerships among television networks, especially cable networks. Considering the eyes, the American people who are tuning in to Fox News to get their information and to get it accurately, I'm surprised that you would say that you're not concerned about this and this is not something that is hugely pressing for the American people.
Here's the way I look at it.
Freedom of the press is the First Amendment in the Constitution.
Oh, exactly. You nailed it. The freedom of the press. So we have CNN, we have Fox. I'm here with you guys. I go on Fox News. I think that's great that we have a marketplace of ideas in this country. What I worry more about, Don, is the trend that we see in this country to controlling what different parties are actually able to say. The American way to bad speech is more speech. And so I think we need to actually embrace that culture and a more diverse marketplace of ideas. That's something we haven't done well enough in this country.
With all honesty, you're not answering the question. You're giving us platitudes about...
I'm actually unsure what your question is, Don. Do you want somebody to bash Fox News on CNN?
No, I'm not asking you to bash Fox. I'm not asking you to bash Fox News. I'm asking you to be honest about what happened on Fox News, about the lies that were told and them having to admit of the lies and paying the largest defamation settlement to a media company in history, and you are a frequent guest on that network. Are you concerned about the credibility? Are you going to continue to go on that network even with those credibility?
I have far more concerns with the credibility of what we will call the mainstream media than I do with the credibility of Fox News. But
Fox is the mainstream media.
At the end of the day, what I say is, look, neither you nor I know the details because they settled it before it went to trial. I think the obsession over this is a little weird.
Vivek, listen,
it's a little bizarre.
I don't want to get into that.
There's real issues to talk about in the country. Why are we talking about Fox News and the settlement?
This is a very big and important story. And I'm not going to, we have much more that we want to talk
I think we should.
about, but we will get there when we're ready to get there. We had you on to talk about these issues. This is a very important issue, and it should not be downplayed. This has to do with American democracy and Americans learning the truth about what happened in the 2020 election.
You want to know what?
I
hear a lot about
comparing it to CNN is not this apples and oranges. It's not the same thing.
Well, it's different networks. Yes, apples aren't the same as oranges. You get one view through CNN, you get a different view through Fox News. I think that's good in our marketplace of ideas is that we have media that offers diverse perspectives. And you want to talk about threats to our democracy? One of the threats, and that phrase is an interesting one, threats to our democracy. I think one of the biggest ones is the chilling effect on speech in our country more broadly, where if somebody says something that a broad segment of the population or certain people in the government disagree with, there's an increasing trend in our country to silence that. And the answer to bad speech and alleged misinformation is not less speech. It is more speech in the marketplace of ideas. That's actually what a free press really means.
We're going to move on, but your answer was good, but it's not about what's actually happening. It's not relevant to what's happening. I think the answer to what happened at Fox News is to tell the truth. Media companies are tasked with telling the truth. That did not happen in this situation. That's why we're asking these questions. But let's move on.
Let's talk more about a diverse exchange of ideas. That's what I'm in for. Thank you.
Glad you're here this morning. Your campaign slogan is a new American dream, and I was reading through your platform last night. I wonder what you would do specifically to actually bring us together, not just Republicans and Democrats. What does unity look like to you, Vivek, for rich and poor, for rural and urban, for Republicans and Democrats?
That is the right question to be asking. And I think the main divide in this country, and I say this to conservative audiences equally, is not between Republicans and Democrats. It is between those of us who are pro-American, embracing the ideals that set this country into motion, and I think an increasing strain in this country that is anti-American, that wishes to apologize for a nation founded on those ideals. But that's not a 50-50 split. I think most people are in the pro-American camp. And, Poppy, I think one of the ways they would say we get to national unity, some people think, is by showing up in the middle and compromising. I respect that view, but I reject it.
You reject compromise?
I reject compromising on our principles. I think the right way to get to national unity, and I mean this, to unite this country, is by embracing actually the radicalism of the American ideals themselves. We celebrate our diversity and differences. I'm glad we have 3 different shades of melanin on this set right now, 2 different genders. That's fine, but what I say is, so what? That diversity is meaningless unless there's something greater that binds us together, that unites us across that diversity. And I'm running for president to revive those ideals that bind us together across our diverse attributes.
I want to get into a few issues, one of them being China. Before I get to China, I just want to better understand something you said this week speaking for the audience at the NRA. Here's what you said, referring to back to 1865. Here it was.
I want you to raise your hand if you know when the first anti-gun laws were passed in this country. Raise your hand if you do. 1865. You want to know when it happened? We fought a civil war in this country to give black Americans the equal protection under the law that we failed to secure them in 1776. But then you want to know what happened? Southern states passed anti-gun laws that stopped black people from owning guns. The Democrat Party, then as in now, wanted to put them back in chains.
Then as in now, that's quite an accusation about the current Democratic Party. Who and what were you referring to?
I was referring to Joe Biden and his expression of wanting to put them back in chains, dating back to Lyndon Johnson. I think Lyndon Johnson's so-called Great Society was one of the greatest misnomers in American political history, where even back then in the 1960s, 70% plus of black kids were born into 2-parent homes. Today, that number is less than 30% in the opposite direction. The very policies that we implemented in this country in the name of helping black Americans have actually been disastrous for black Americans and all Americans. And I think that that's something that we need to wake up to.
In 1865, you were talking about the black codes, right?
That's right.
Passed, enacted to make it a crime for a black person to carry a gun in the South. But you're equating that to the current president? You're referring to economic chains? What are you saying?
Well, I was referring to Joe Biden's, I think, ill-chosen expression to say they're the party that wants to put you back into chains. What I'm actually saying is that if you look at the policies of the modern Democratic Party...
about Democrats.
Absolutely. So what I'm saying is that actually it's policies like that of Lyndon Johnson and Joe Biden that are actually holding black Americans back.
The war on poverty?
Yes, and in particular, his Great Society, where he actually created incentives in the family, where if you're a family, you could actually get more money by not having the father in the home. Guess what you get? You get what you pay for. And I think it's been really bad for the black community. I think it's really bad for all Americans.
Do you have anything on this before I move on to China?
I don't see what one has to do with the other, but go on. I took up a lot of time with Fox.
Oh, it's fine. We have time.
I don't really see what one has to do with the other, especially consider and using the Civil War to talk about black Americans. That war was not fought for black people to have guns. That's not.
That war was fought for black people to have freedoms in this country. Yeah. Actually, that's why the Civil War was fought.
Okay.
And the sad part about
it, that wasn't fought for black people to have guns. I think.
Actually, you know, funny fact is, black people did not get to enjoy the other freedoms until their Second Amendment rights were secured. And I think that that's one of the lessons that we learned.
Black people still aren't allowed to enjoy the freedoms.
I disagree with you on that, Don. I disagree with you. And I think you're doing a disservice to our country by failing to recognize the fact that we have equality before the law.
When you are in black skin and you live in this country, then you can disagree with me. But we're not. You mentioned in here that we have three different shades of melanin.
Don, I think we have to be able to talk about these issues in the open, regardless of the color of our skin. Black Americans today, to say that, compare that to 1865 and 1964,
I think for you to compare it to 1865 and 1964
is actually,
I think it's insulting to black people. It's insulting to me as an African American. I don't want to sit here and argue with you because it's infuriating for you to put those things together. It's not right. Your telling of history is wrong.
What part of the history was wrong? What part of the history was wrong?
That the Civil War was fought. You're making people think that the Civil War was fought for black people, only for black people to get guns and for black people to have.
The Civil War was fought for black people in this country to get freedoms, a noble mission. And I think that even after we succeeded, we had to actually secure those freedoms.
To reduce it in a speech at the NRA to say you're making people think, or you're trying to say that black people to get guns, that was the reason that you're there at the NRA. That was the reason for the Civil War.
It is a fact.
That's reductive.
It's not
and
reductive,
I think it's insulting. There were a whole plethora of reasons that for the Civil War.
With due respect, I find your explanation reductive and actually insulting, including to black Americans, to say that black people today, compared to 1964, 1865, haven't made progress in part because of the freedoms we secured. And the Second Amendment was
black
part
people
of it.
Cannot keep a thought if you guys are talking to me in my ear. So hang on one second. So to say that black people, say what you said again.
Black people secured their freedoms after the Civil War. It is a historical fact, Don. Just study it. Only after their Second Amendment rights were secured.
That's a fact. Not secured their freedoms after the Civil War. That is not. You are discounting Reconstruction. You're discounting a whole host of things that happened after the Civil War when it comes to African Americans, including the whole reason that the Civil Rights Movement happened is because black people did not secure their freedoms after the Civil War, and that things turned around. People tried to change the freedoms that were supposed to happen.
And you know how they got it? They got their Second Amendment rights, and they actually got the NRA played a big role in that. But today, Don, the
NRA did not play a big role in that.
They trained black Americans how to use firearms.
That's a lie. That's not. The NRA did not play a big role in that.
This is just historical fact. But Don, the part that I find
because you say it's historical fact.
The part that I find insulting is when you say today black Americans don't have those rights after we have gone through the civil rights revolution in this country.
You are sitting here telling an African American about the rights and what you find insulting about the way I live, the skin I live in every day.
Here's where you and I have
the freedoms that black and white that black people don't have in this country, and that black people do have.
Well, here's where you and I have a different point of view. I think we should be able to express our views regardless of the color of our skin. We should have this debate without me regarding you as a black man, but me regarding you as a fellow citizen. That's what I think we should see.
Whatever ethnicity you are explaining to me.
Whatever ethnicity I am,
what it's like to be black.
Whatever ethnicity I am, I'll tell you what I am. I'm an Indian American. I'm proud of it. But I think we should have this debate. Black, white doesn't matter.
I think we should have this
on
debate.
The content of the ideas.
If you're going to do it, you should do it in an honest way and in a fair way. And what you're doing is not an honest and fair way. Okay? But we appreciate you coming on.
With due respect, Don, I look forward to continuing that conversation.
We'll
Thank
continue
you.
the conversation.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you, Papa.
We'll talk about China.
Yes, let's talk about China.
Next time you come back.
Oh, thank you. Much to say on declaring independence from China.
Okay,
something you can
move on now, please.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Republican presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy, also from Ohio. We just made a key race alert there. Obviously, Vivek, voters there voting yes on issue 1 to enshrine the right to an abortion in the state's constitution. Do you think that's a warning sign for Republicans?
Look, I voted no on that earlier today before flying down here to Miami, but my view is, on the merits, our pro-life movement, and I am part of it, needs to be better about the way we discuss this issue. Actually talk about greater access to adoption, to child care, even go further to sexual responsibility for men. I think that very too few of us are talking about these issues that can say we're not in this, it's not about a men's rights versus women's rights issue. It's a human rights issue. The fact of the matter is, Clarence Thomas brought up an example in the Dobbs case of a pregnant woman who was assaulted and asks the question of who in this country would say that that criminal doesn't deserve liability for that death. I haven't met one yet, Caitlin. And so I think we're more united on the pro-life instincts than the pro-life movement has actually been good at representing so far. But we need to talk about the issue very differently in order to bring people along here. I will say that it was also outspent in Ohio by many multiples, the yes versus no. And the influence of money in politics, I think, showed up in this result as well.
Well, a lot of money was spent on the other side, but do you really think it's a messaging issue and not just that voters clearly believe that they should have the rights that they had before Roe versus Wade was overturned?
Well, I think some of this is substance. It's not just messaging. Actually walking the walk when it comes to being pro-life on access to contraception, to adoption, to even childcare, and as I said, a missing lever that we really ought to embrace on the right is greater sexual responsibility for men codified in the law in an era of genetic paternity tests. Put more of a burden, financially and otherwise, on the father when it's a confirmed paternity test. I think those are winning paths forward for us. That combined with different messaging, yes, I do believe will win many Americans over. If you look at a state like Iowa, not that different in many respects than Ohio. I mean, they're very different states, but when you look at a red versus blue divide, Iowa went for a 6-week ban with growing majorities for the legislators who supported it. I do think the framing and the messaging and the context actually does matter. I don't think this should be a sign that the Republican Party should abandon a pro-life position.
Iowa is Iowa, home to a lot of evangelicals. I mean, Ohio is a deeply red state. You don't think this is a sign that your party's on the wrong side of the abortion issue?
I think it is a sign that the Republican Party needs to graduate in how not only we talk about this issue, but putting substance into what it means to be pro-life. And I, for my part, am doing that. I think I'm the only candidate talking about codifying in the law greater sexual responsibility for men. But I think the less we make this about men's rights versus women's rights, but really in substance, say we're all in this together. I think so. I think so,
over
absolutely.
A
it's
right
going to be up to the voters
abortion?
to decide. It should be driven by the states. And so it's up to the people to speak up at the state level. But I do think that if we frame this issue correctly, this need not be some sort of final sign that we take. This was a lost battle in Ohio today. I'm disappointed about that. I think there are deep reflections in the Republican Party and in the pro-life movement about how to improve from here. But abandoning the pro-life cause, I don't think is the right answer. I think the right answer is opening up other ways where we can walk the walk in terms of being pro-life, from adoption to contraception to sexual responsibility for men codified in the law.
So,
and I favor all of those things.
Just to be clear, you think the issue is how Republicans are talking about abortion, or talking about contraception and adoption, not the actual issue of being against abortion access?
I'm just talking about it, as I mentioned, Caitlin, but I think being willing to stand for substantive provisions in the law that codify greater responsibility for men in cases of confirmed paternity tests, and also greater access to options like contraception, adoption, and otherwise. So I think that substantive difference can make a difference. It's not just a verbal question, but yes, I do think that that will change the outcomes versus what we're seeing tonight.
Yeah, well, clearly voters in Ohio disagreed since they just voted to pass this they did vote to pass this. Indeed, it now is part of the state's constitution. You talked about how this is a state's issue. Obviously, you're running to be the Republican candidate for president. If you were president, would you sign a federal abortion ban into law if it was on your desk?
I've been crystal clear about this. I would not. And the reason why is I'm a 10th Amendment absolutist. I practice what I preach in my commitment to the Constitution. This should not be a federal issue. So here's what I do from a federal perspective. Stop federal funding for Planned Parenthood. I think the federal government has no place in tilting the scales using money. But I do not think it is the place of the federal government to get involved in either codifying Roe versus Wade into law. But unlike many other Republican candidates, I stand on the side of principle because that's a constitutional law. Roe versus Wade was correctly overturned, but we have to practice what we preach when it comes to the Constitution. This is an issue for the states, and I say this as somebody who's disappointed by the outcome in Ohio today. But for me, it is about principle over politics when it comes to my commitment to the Constitution. I also think that if we federalize this issue as Republicans, when the shoe fits the other foot and Democrats are in charge, it will not go well for the pro-life cause at the federal level either. More babies, unborn babies will die over the next 30 years, I believe, if this issue is federalized.
I will say,
stand by
Mr. Ramaswamy, that, I mean, Donald Trump predicted, put those Supreme Court justices in place that overturned Roe versus Wade, that this is hurting Republicans at the ballot box. But we have other news about another race in your home state. I want you to stand by for just a moment. We're going to get that update, and then we'll come back to you in just a moment.
We have a new projection for you from Ohio. CNN is projecting that Ohioans have approved a ballot measure to legalize recreational marijuana use for adults. Ohio becomes the 24th state in the nation to make recreational pot use legal. Again, CNN projects the Ohio ballot initiative on marijuana has been approved.
Mr. Ramaswamy, we were just talking about how you voted on issue 1, the abortion rights issue. How did you vote on the marijuana issue this morning?
I voted no on that one specifically for 2 reasons. One is I think it's an abandonment of the rule of law when you have one set of rules at the federal level, but state laws that contradict federal law. I don't think that helps our commitment to the rule of law. I think it creates a lot of confusion in this country. And also the tax proceeds here were directed towards purposes that I think have no place, equity programs or otherwise, that are completely irrelevant to the measure at issue. So having studied it, I came down on the side of no, but I did hear the update that you just provided. And, at the end of the day, we live in a constitutional republic. That means we live by what the people vote for according to the rules of that constitutional republic. And so, that is what it is. And I understand that, but I disagree with the outcome that was reached.
Do you feel out of touch with your other Ohioans, and given the fact that you voted no on the abortion rights issue and you voted no on the marijuana issue, and both have passed?
And we're talking about 40+% in each case. So I think to call that out of touch with Ohioans, I think is out of touch, Caitlin, with all due respect. We do have issues we need to sort out in this country. Yeah, I don't think you're asking my thoughts. You were asking me if I feel out of touch because I sided with 45% of people rather than 55% of people, or wherever the numbers end up shaking out. The reality is I think we have legitimate substantive debates we ought to have in this country. My view is let's have them respectfully in the open where every citizen's voice and vote counts equally. And you know what? That's the way a constitutional republic works. Our side, I think, needs to do a better job of not only how we message, but how we stand for the substance of our principles. I think there's a reasonable conversation to be had about at the federal level about how we evolve our drug laws, but I think the disconnect between state level laws that are drastically different than the federal laws create confusion and create, I would say, an abandonment of the culture of the rule of law in this country, and that's why I voted no.
Yeah, Vivek Ramaswamy, great to have you with us on that Ohio news, given you are an Ohio voter. Thank you so much. We'll see you in Miami tomorrow night.
We so appreciate you taking the time and for having us on your bus.
It's a lot of fun.
Look, we are getting very close to this very first debate. What is your strategy?
Well, I'm sitting here in Iowa. We're having this conversation. I'm going from here day after tomorrow to New Hampshire. After that, I'll be in California, Nevada, Texas, Atlanta, South Carolina, and then back to Ohio. And that'll take us pretty darn close to the debate stage. So that gives you a sense of my strategy, which is to not be over artificial or over prepared, really, and instead continue to talk to voters across this country, which I think is probably the best form of debate prep.
Well, let's talk about some of the challenges that you're encountering. You've never held a public office before. You're trying to be the next president of the United States.
That's correct.
Why do you think voters should believe that you are best equipped for that position? And what are some of the challenges that you're experiencing on the campaign trail, just in terms of introducing yourself to the American people?
Well, if somebody broke your car, you don't turn it over to them to fix it. And I think our government is badly broken, and it's been broken by the people who have been running that government or serving in that government. So when it comes to the next president of the United States, I think we absolutely need an outsider. I think we need an outsider, preferably from a different generation. I'm the one person in this race, I think, who is not just leading us from something. I'm leading us to start running to something, to an actual vision of what it means to be an American, with an actual agenda, not just against the failed Biden agenda. That's boring. I think it's just, Republican Party often sounds like a bunch of partisan hacks at that time. I don't talk about Biden a ton. I talk more about what we stand for. That's how we win this election in a landslide. And I don't come from the world of partisan politics. I think that's actually a competitive advantage. I think that's actually what it's going to take to restore integrity and accountability to government, to dismantle the bureaucracy in Washington, D.C. And I think I've been an entrepreneur. I understand how to build things. I'm an executive. I think those are going to be useful skill sets in leading us from the White House. But even more importantly, to actually have a vision that reaches the next generation of Americans.
There's been a lot that has been said about your campaign. One of the things that I do keep hearing is Trump 2.0. Why should voters support you over the former president if he's in this race again?
Well, I call it America First 2.0. And the reality is, I think Trump was an excellent president. He laid a great foundation on policies that many people who even aren't Republicans quietly agree with them now. Building the border wall, controversial then, widely accepted today. The truth is, I'm going further than Trump did. Building the wall is insufficient. There are cartel-financed tunnels underneath that wall. I support using the U.S. military to secure our southern border. That's what it's going to take to end the fentanyl crisis in this country, to end the human trafficking and illegal migrant crisis. I don't just favor putting Betsy DeVos on top of the Department of Education and say, fix it. I stand for shutting it down, like so many other parts of the administrative state. But I think I will be better positioned to unite the country, to win the next election in a landslide. I don't think there's another Republican in this race who can deliver a Reagan 1980-style landslide like I think I'm in a position to do.
Uniting the country is something I hear a lot from Republican candidates as I cover this campaign. I want to ask you about some of the indictments with the former president. As you know, there are several investigations.
Yes.
And he could possibly be on trial right as the Republican primary starts to heat up. Do you see that as a distraction for where the party should be heading?
Well, I want to talk about it at the level of the nation. I think it is a disastrous precedent that we're setting as a country, that the ruling party, the party in power, will use politicized force in the middle of an election to try to eliminate its opposition. That's not the country I want to see. When you and I are having this conversation as we speak, I'm polling at third in the Republican national primary, and some polls now creeping into second. It would be a lot easier for me if Donald Trump were not in this race. That's not how I want to win. That's not right. The way we do it in this country is that we, the people, get to decide who governs. And I think this is a real betrayal of the way we live in a constitutional republic. And so I think it's really important for those of us who are running against Trump to be especially abundantly clear about how wrong those prosecutions are. That's why it disappoints me when other Republicans are trying to seize and take advantage of that to find a hole. No, I think we have to stand on the side of principle, stand on the side of justice.
Right now, there's going to be a debate in Congress about supplying another round of funding to Ukraine.
Yes.
Do you believe that's necessary?
Not only do I not believe it's necessary, I believe it is downright ill-advised and corrupt. Joe Biden, the Democrats, and many of the Republicans in the neocon establishment as well have yet to articulate what is the U.S. national interest that's at stake. It makes zero sense. And then you say, hey, that's the same administration whose president has a son that was paid millions of dollars by a state-affiliated energy company on whose board he had no business serving, while that same president was the vice president. Now does it make sense why we're using $200 billion of taxpayer aid? I think that is a legitimate question to ask, and frankly, the answer does not smell good.
If you're commander-in-chief, does financial support for Ukraine end?
Yes.
Or stop?
Stops. And you know what else stops? The war stops. I will lead the way in negotiating a peace deal. Freeze the current lines of control, a Korean War-style armistice agreement. I will further make a hard commitment that NATO should never admit Ukraine. But in return, I will require that Vladimir Putin exit Russia's military partnership with China. The China-Russia military alliance is the single greatest military threat to the United States, and I am stunned that neither political party or a leader in either political party has either the spine or the perception to actually talk about it. This is the real threat we face, and we are doing ourselves no favors by driving Russia further into China's arms. That's what's happening day by day.
You've made a lot of headlines for parts of your campaign platform and policy, including the elimination, the call to eliminate certain federal agencies, starting with the Department of Justice, Department of Education, and the FBI.
Yes.
Do you not see any purpose at all for those agencies?
In some cases, those agencies have purposes that should not exist. The Department of Education is in that category. The federal government should have nothing to do with administering local education. shut it down is the answer. The FBI is a redundant agency. And when you have a redundant agency, that's a formula for corruption, which is exactly what we see. Corruption and politicization. So in some ways, that policy may sound extreme to some people. And you know what? The founding ideals of this country, let's own them. They are extreme. The fact that we, the people, live in a constitutional republic with a government that's accountable to us, not the other way around, yes. For most of human history, that is an extreme ideal, and I'll own it. But it's also deeply practical. The 35,000 employees at the FBI, well, 20,000 of them are in back office functions. That's where the rot begins, the politicization. People who report into work at the J. Edgar Hoover building of the FBI that really shouldn't have had those jobs in the first place. We're going to cut them, and we're going to say, go find honest work in the private sector. Now, there are 15,000 agents, good people on the front lines that are doing important work. We will make a better use of those individuals by reassigning them to the U.S. Marshals, doing a much better job on the child sex trafficking front in fighting that than the FBI is. We'll reassign them to places like the DEA, much better job on fighting the fentanyl crisis than random generalists at the FBI are doing. We'll reassign them to the Financial Enforcement Network, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network at the U.S. Treasury, far greater expertise to fight complex white-collar crime and theft than the generalists at the FBI. That is how we both increase the effectiveness of a federal government that's taking on, frankly, issues that they've been wildly ineffective at taking on. And I think you'll find other candidates who, after I generally say these things, will repeat the slogans. But we need somebody who actually has the ability to see that through and get it done. And that's why I'm in this race.
How do you do it?
Well, I think I use strong legal authority to do it. I think you need a president who's an outsider. That's what I bring to the table, and I share that in common with Trump. In my case, I actually built the companies from scratch. I didn't, inherit anything. I built the companies from zero to nothing. My parents came to this country with no money. I've built multi-billion-dollar companies, but I respect Trump's success as a businessman, but I don't respect professional political experience of spouting off slogans without actually building something in the private sector. Because if you've been a CEO, like me, you know that if somebody works for you and you can't fire them, that means they don't work for you. It means you work for them. Because you're responsible for what they do without having any authority to change it. So I refuse to be that kind of puppet sitting in the White House. I also know and deeply understand the Constitution and the laws of this country. I won't let the managerial class tell me that the civil service protections stop me from carrying out my vision. Because I've actually read the law. Read the civil service protections. They protect against individual politicized firings. They do not apply to mass layoffs. Mass layoffs are absolutely what I am bringing to the DC bureaucracy.
You even admit that a lot of people would look at that policy and think, this is extreme. Would you expect legal challenges to that?
Yes, I do. And I think that's a good thing. Because I've also studied the current Supreme Court, and they agree with me 6-3 on this. The same Supreme Court that ruled in West Virginia versus EPA, striking down those unconstitutional regulations. The same Supreme Court that appropriately struck down the Biden student loan forgiveness program via the Department of Education. Yes, that same constitutional understanding, the one that I share, the one that the justices that I appoint will share. I'm the only candidate who's outlined which federal judges and justices I would appoint. That's how we drive change on the timescale of history. So it'll be a good thing when I get sued, because we take that to the Supreme Court and then codify this understanding of the Constitution into judicial precedent. That is how we drive change on the timescale of history.
I can tell you, I've been traveling the country. I've made a lot of stops here in Iowa, and I've talked to a lot of voters, and even the ones that aren't supporting you are intrigued by your platform and are impressed by what you said on the stump. I know you're in this race to be the next president of the United States, to win the nomination. If you are not the nominee, would you consider being a running mate to the former president? Would you consider even a cabinet position?
I will be the nominee. That is my firm expectation. And the reality is that many of these people who I'm pleased to say they're saying complimentary things even if they're not voting for me, they hadn't heard of me 6 months ago, or 5 months ago, or even 4 months ago in many cases. And so we're exactly where we want to be ahead of the first debate. My job in this race is to be transparent about who I am, what do I stand for, why am I in this race, and what will I deliver? If every voter across this country knows that and then they don't want to vote for me, I'm at peace with that decision. What we're seeing is that my name ID is still relatively lower than the other candidates, and yet I'm polling at second or third. That's a good sign to say once people do get to know what I stand for, they're coming with us. And so that's why I'm as a data-driven guy, pretty confident we're going to win. We're not even buying TV ads, even in states like the ones we're in yet. where other candidates are spending boatloads of money on TV ads to just sustain their poll numbers, I think it's a very good sign for us. But I'm not attached to the results because this isn't about me, it's about the country. My question is, how do I have maximal impact on this country?
Back to State of the Union, I'm Caitlin Collins. It's a familiar biography, a multimillionaire businessman running for president, promising to shake up Washington. His name is not former President Trump, it's Vivek Ramaswamy. He is 37, he's using his biotech fortune to make early inroads with Republican voters, and the candidate, Vivek Ramaswamy, joins me now. Thank you so much for being here. You know, touting your outsider status as a quality, but I don't know of any president in recent history we've had that did not either hold office or was not a national figure like Trump was. Why do you think you can win?
I'm running distinctively on my vision for this country. I'm not running on my biography or my business credentials. I'm running on a vision for this country that I've articulated over the last several years, and a lot of the conservative base actually is familiar with me through the 3 books I've written, 2 of which are published, traveled the country and otherwise. But my view is we're in the middle of this national identity crisis, where if you ask most people my age, really any age, what does it mean to be an American today? You get a blank stare in response. And I think that is the vacuum at the heart of our national soul. And I think the opportunity for the GOP now is not just to complain about wokeness or gender ideology or climate ideology, but actually to go upstream and fill that black hole with a vision of American national identity that runs so deep that it dilutes these agendas to irrelevance and actually unifies us as a country. And I'm running because I believe genuinely that I'm the candidate best positioned to actually deliver national unity by reawakening that shared American identity.
I want to ask you more about that platform, but you are self-funding your campaign, at least for right now. How much are you prepared to spend?
There's really no limit we've put on in terms of what I'm going to spend on this campaign. I've been fortunate to live the full arc of the American dream, and if there's one thing I care about advancing, it is about reviving that missing national identity in our country, where we've celebrated our diversity for so long that we forgot the ways we're really just the same. That is what I care about more than anything else. That being said, I think a lot of businessmen or history would teach self-funders make the mistake of thinking that they can just use their own money as a substitute for gaining the support of voters. To the contrary, this campaign's actually going to be lifted up by bottom-up grassroots donations. We're already off to a great start in the first few weeks on that front as well. So it'll be a combination of those things. But what it did liberate me from is many Republicans, what they do is they ring the tin can, carry a hat in hand, and ask for donors for permission to run. I was allowed to skip that step because of not only my accomplishments, but the fact that I don't want to be beholden to a Republican donor class. That's the normal gatekeeper in this process. One of the things I'm calling out.
Well, on that front, one of the things, you've been dubbed the CEO of anti-woke. You have written several of these books. You've been very vocal of your criticism of what you say is wokeism, woke religion. Can you just define how you define woke?
Yeah, and I'm going to define it in neutral terms, not in critical terms. Being woke refers to becoming alert to invisible societal injustices, generally based on genetically inherited characteristics like race, sex, and sexual orientation, and then being called upon to act on those injustices using whatever potential legally means are necessary, including the market, to do it. That's a neutral definition that even most proponents of wokeism in the United States would agree with. Now, my criticism of this is I think that it's inherently divisive to tell us that we're nothing more than the characteristics we inherit on the day we're born. That divides us on the basis of race and sex and sexual orientation. And then when that merges with capitalism, which is what I've actually been the biggest critic of, what it does is we lose the sanctuary, the apolitical sanctuary in our economy that otherwise brings us together, whether we're black or white, even whether we're Democrat or Republican. That's one of the underappreciated reasons why capitalism has to stay apolitical. And I'm proud to say I've been the leader on leading that fight over the course of the last couple of years, and with some progress, because I think we're turning the tide where companies are realizing that they're not doing good for themselves or even doing good for society by engaging in these fraught political and social questions. Yeah. And I think we're beginning to see that change of the tide.
I know you have a lot of positions on the company's aspect. I want to get to that. But when it comes to this, is this your platform, would you argue? Because when people talk about inflation and what they're paying at the grocery store, do you really think that is the message that appeals to voters right now?
Well, that's the message I've been advancing for the last 3 years, but now we're taking this to the next level and running for the presidency. We're actually running to actually deliver unity to the country. It's much bigger than that. One of the core aspects of my platform is actually unleashing the American economy itself. There's this false debate, even within the GOP, between spending cuts or between raising taxes, between Democrats and Republicans. I think we have forgotten the biggest ingredient to actually deliver us from our problems. That is GDP growth itself. GDP growth was over 4% in this country until the early
early 70s. It's been less than 2.5% ever since. I think we need to unleash the American animal inside the heart of the American economy. And so that's why I'm taking aim at certain opponents or certain anti-growth measures. I think we find a lot of that in the climate change policies in this country. That's why I've been as focused as I have on actually unleashing not only American energy, but the American economy overall. But to answer your question, no, this is about something bigger. This is about reviving a missing national identity. And that's the missing ingredient to both unleashing our economy, as well as, and this is a core part of my campaign, taking on the actual foreign policy challenges that we face on the global stage. Number one is communist China. And I'm leading the way in this race in calling for a declaration of independence from China, because the key difference today is, unlike the USSR in the last century, we never depended on the Soviet Union for the shoes on our feet or the phones in our pockets. That is the case today. I think it's the number one external threat we face. And so I'm actually delivering a vision of national identity that hopefully allows us to make the short-run sacrifices we'll need to on the global stage to actually win as a country over the long run.
China is a major issue. We'll get to that in a moment. But do you consider yourself a conservative? How would you define that?
I do consider myself a conservative, but I don't believe that the defining political debate in this country is between Republicans and Democrats. I think it is between those who are fundamentally pro-American, whether you believe in the ideals that set this nation into motion, from free speech and open debate to meritocracy to self-governance over aristocracy. Do you believe in those ideals? Or are you anti-American? Do you actually wish to apologize for a nation whose existence is pinned to those ideals? And if you divide it up that way, I think it's actually an 80-20 split in this country. It's not just 50-50. And I think that sets up for a potential landslide election in 2024. Frankly, part of my motivation to run is to deliver that, because I think that's the single most unifying thing we could get out of this country, just like a 1980 or 1984 style, Reagan style victory as well. So
given
that's
what you've said about limited government, what you were just talking there about corporations being apolitical, do you agree with what Florida Governor Ron DeSantis did with Disney after they spoke out about his education bill?
I would have handled that situation a little bit differently, and I think we need to be actually precise about what the real drivers are of corporate wokeism. One of the underappreciated realities is that Disney's largest shareholders are BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard. Indeed, the three institutions that promote ESG, environmental and social agendas in corporate America's boardrooms, that are the largest shareholders of most public American companies. And what they do is they set a cultural tone that causes these companies to behave in politicized ways from their boardrooms on down. That's a problem that needs to be fixed through the market, and I don't really believe in governments, whether it's on the left or on the right. You see this on the left too, using the bully pulpit as a way to drive corporate change. I think the right way to drive corporate change is actually to do it through the root cause itself. And in this case, a lot of that's top down, driven by the ESG movement in capital markets and in corporate America's boardroom.
Help on the ground. But we on our side also talk a big game about America first without actually bringing all of America along with us. And what I saw in that room today was a room of people which says we're all in this together. Yes, we have been left behind by professional politicians who will help somebody who illegally crosses the southern border more than they help somebody here in our own community. But there's a better way.
System is far more constraining. Public schools are in regions like this, that we're going to have to rethink in even deeper ways that just a president alone is not going to be able to address. It's going to take all of us doing it from the bottom on up. I also think that this is an opportunity for, if I may speak to my fellow conservatives, for conservatives to do better than we have in showing up. Yes, we criticize the Democratic Party, and for good reason.
So that's where I'm at. Yeah. This is the last. I'm gonna digress. I gotta say this. I need you, but in response to that, if you give everybody that same chance, some people that were not catapulted on the same platform are still gonna be ahead of us. We will never close the wealth gap during the campaign. And when you say race, I'm not talking about race. I'm talking about black people. Because you would come from Nigeria and be over here and be classified as black.
And that's the people who benefit from it.
Right, but I'm talking specifically descendants of slaves, people whose ancestors, right, was on picking cotton, was being whipped, was being hanged, was being
recently in the news. I don't know if you have been saying, I don't know if talked about the speed of your staff, but Governor Abbott has sent an influx of migrants to Chicago.
Yep, he has.
This has been declared a sanctuary city, been a sanctuary city for a long time.
Yep.
I'm a Christian. I do believe in being a good neighbor, but I also believe in being a good steward. A lot of the benefits that the migrants have been receiving, African Americans in this city have not been receiving those same type of benefits. When it comes to housing, when when it comes to school, just when it comes to a lot of different person benefits. Question to you is, and the South Shore High School, as you know, is going to house possibly thousands of migrants, right?
We're going there next.
A lot of our neighbors, feel away about it. My question to you is, how would you handle that situation? How would you handle the influx of migrants? Because we definitely don't want anybody to be homeless, but in a sense, also, we definitely want to make sure that we are fighting toward making sure that African Americans who get the homeless as well. But how would you?
The way I look at it is, I don't blame the individual migrants as human beings. I'm going to preface it by saying that. If I was in their position, living a tough life in Honduras or Nicaragua or Mexico, maybe I'd be doing the same thing. But we live in a nation here, and we have to put Americans first. That's what it means to govern. So I would, Joe Biden, you got your new mayor here, they dance around this. I say we actually secure the border. We use the military not to secure somebody else's border halfway around the world in Ukraine or wherever else. Use our own military to secure our own border. And for people here whose first act of entering this country broke the law, treat them humanely, treat them respectfully, but you have to go back and come back through the legal process if you're going to come at all. And then the last piece was $7,000 a month per migrant is what they're spending. Those same dollars can actually be used to support development that helps Americans right here at home. So I think that if there's one wake-up call, if we can do this, if we can have baby formula and expensive sneakers and $7,000 a month for somebody whose first act of entering this country broke the law, that reveals that we can actually be doing more to help Americans right here at home, including Americans in this community in the south side of Chicago.
What do you feel about people who say that government hasn't been using the migrants?
Tell you, I don't like partisan politics very much, but I'm going to speak truth. It's Chicago that was calling itself a sanctuary city, right? Your mayor boasts to the country that we're a sanctuary, that we're the ones who are going to make people come. I don't blame, in this case, the person who's saying that I'm protecting the residents in my state. If somebody else wants to say that they're a sanctuary city, and then people actually send them, I think it's your mayor that bears accountability for that. I'm not blaming him for the sake of blaming him. I'm blaming him. I think that the citizens of this city can hold him accountable to say that, you know what, how about you look after the people who actually lived here and voted for you and pay taxes here and actually live here and whose families have lived here, rather than solving somebody else's problem somewhere else. That's where I think the problem actually rests.
Doing business in China, I would ban. Nike, you name it. NBA, if you're affiliated with the Chinese Communist Party, you will not buy lands in this country. We haven't had a president either. I am. And you're asking the right question because that's the shared big challenge we face. Is China.
Welcome back to Politics Nation. According to a brand new Wall Street Journal poll out today that was conducted entirely after the first Republican presidential debate and mostly after the release of Donald Trump's Fulton County mugshot, the former president holds a whopping 46-point lead over Florida Governor Ron DeSantis among GOP primary voters, 59 to 13%. My next guest is also somewhere on that list, but with much less support, with 5%. Joining me now is 2024 presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy. First of all, thank you for being here and engaging us in this conversation. I want to start with comments you made repeatedly now, referring to Massachusetts Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley and author Ibram Kendi as, quote, grand wizards of the modern KKK. Now, I understand you differ with both of them politically and probably with me, but as a graduate of Harvard and Yale universities, I believe you must be aware the Ku Klux Klan is not a political party. It's a terrorist organization. Historians view the Klan as the driving force behind lynchings of blacks in the American South, more than 4,000 people murdered from 1877 to 1950. And the group is linked to numerous other acts of racial violence continuing through the civil rights movement to the present day. You're running to be the leader of the free world, so your choice of words matter. Have you taken any time to reflect upon the possibility that comparing your political rivals to murderous terrorists might put their lives in danger at a time when hate crimes are on the rise? Or do you just don't care?
So Reverend Sharpton, I don't look at the world through political parties. Frankly, it's good to see it's been 20 years since we last spoke. And part of the reason that I came to that event 20 years ago with you is that you were a political outsider just like I am in my own party. But let me talk about the issue you're actually asking about, which is that, you know what's toxic about that old worldview of organizations like the KKK, which have been a god-awful stain on our national history, is that they say that your skin color determines what you're allowed to say, what you're allowed to think. To say you have to shut up, sit down, and do as you're told because you're black or brown skinned. Well, you know what Ayanna Pressley said much more recently is that we don't want any more black faces that don't want to be a black voice. We don't want any more brown faces that don't want to be a brown voice. And so, yes, I do think there are echoes of a historical ugly racism in this country now showing up in new clothing.
To say we
and
don't
what I want to lead us to as the next president
just a second.
is a
To say
united
that we
nation
do not want
where we
black
don't actually
voices,
judge each other on the color of our
to
skin.
say that is not going with sheets and burning crosses and lynching people. If she said something you disagree with,
the point I'm making,
you cannot equate Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan with somebody saying something that you think is a little controversial or a little too far. Some of our relatives were terrorists. I'm trying to get you to understand
I know
the pain
you're intellectually
of that.
honest. I know you're an intellectually honest guy, and so I will remind you that Hakeem Jeffries drew analogies between Donald Trump and the Ku Klux Klan, and I don't think you had him on pressing him in the same way. So we're drawing analogies here to make a point.
He did not call Donald Trump the Grand Dragon of the KKK. He did not call Donald Trump an officer of the modern KKK. Let's not change what was said.
So, Reverend Sharpton, though, I'm calling out a double standard and saying that certain people can use certain analogies to make a point. Well, I'm using an analogy to make a point. And the point I'm making is we should stop seeing each other on the basis of our skin color. It was god-awful when the KKK did it. But you know what? We have to learn a lesson in the present that we're creating more racial division in this country.
But you
when
cannot
you say if you have black skin, you can only think one thing.
You cannot do it being insensitive to our feeling. Like, that's like calling somebody of any kind of group that had a group that were terrorizing.
So I agree with you, we need sensitivity.
So I think we need to be very careful about that. And I wanted to raise that with you directly. Let me go to my next point.
And I respect that you're willing to have
a couple of questions. And one thing, you know, if you talked, you mentioned we talked 20 years ago, and I'm going to get to that, but you should have known 20 years ago. You're not going to out-talk me, so let me ask my question. I'll let you talk, then I'll go back to the next point.
Goes both ways, yeah.
All right. You've spoken out against affirmative action and diversity programs, even though it is a reporting in Axios and elsewhere have produced evidence your own former company has been involved in various DEI and ESG initiatives. Your own companies, DEI, diversity. I would hope we can agree that historically many communities of color have not enjoyed the same socio-economic benefits as white Americans. And many of those disparities persist to this day. What specifically would you do as president to address that problem, keeping in mind your own company got diversity business?
Yeah, so I want to be very clear about that. After I stepped down as CEO, precisely to speak my mind freely, the company that I founded went the direction of most companies in corporate America. And I disagree with that decision. But you're asking a more important question about what are we going to do to ensure equality of opportunity in this country. You're right. We have been an imperfect nation. I've always said it. But we aspire towards perfection. How do we go that next step? I want to make sure kids aren't trapped in the ghetto of a zip code that they happen to be born in. To the contrary, I think every parent deserves to have the opportunity to send their kids to the best possible school. That's why I favor radical school choice in this country. I think it's a mystery, Reverend Sharpton. The very people who will wax eloquent about systemic racism are also the ones who are opposed to educational mobility. That's why I've said shut down the U.S. Department of Education. Use that $80 billion,
put it in the hands of parents so they can actually send their kids to that best possible school they can. That's the actual civil rights issue of our time. So I stand for solutions. I stand for equality of opportunity. But I reject race-based quota systems.
I did not go to Harvard, but I know when a question is not answered. I did not ask you about education. I asked you about diversity in business. I asked you about a company you headed getting DEI. How do we deal with
here's what I'm against.
Wait a minute. Let me ask the question again. How do we deal with the economic disparity in businesses of color and people of color in the economic arena? You ran the school choice, good duck, but wrong show. Deal with the economic. You're a businessman.
It's actually related. You know, I know you're smarter than this to know that education leads to economic prosperity. So there's no Band-Aid fix.
But after you're educated, we have educated people that can't get contracts. We have educated people that have no problem with being educated that can't get contracts. How do you deal with the inequality in how they do business in this country, how they get jobs? That's where the DEI programs come from.
So I understand where they come from. I'm against it because it causes us to see one another on the basis of our skin color. I can tell you from personal experience, I have hired, both in businesses I've founded, even in this campaign, people who are black executives who have, I think, been unfairly judged. I put them in those positions because of merit. Other people at the companies and otherwise have seen those people as getting that position because of racial quota systems. That is wrong, no matter whether you're black or white.
Many
of
them
we need to go
barred
back to colorblind meritocracy. That's what we need in this country. That's how I've led the companies I've built. That's how I will lead this country.
You know that many of them were barred and had the merit. But since you talked about experience, I need to show you this tape. Back in 2003, when I ran for president and you were there to ask me a question at a forum I was doing at Harvard University. So 20 years later, now my turn to ask. Let me first play you the tape of you and I 20 years ago.
Let's get to my question here. Go ahead. Reverend Sharpton, hello. I'm Vivek, and I want to ask you, last week on the show we had Senator Kerry, and this week and the week before we had Senator Edwards. And my question for you is, of all the Democratic candidates out there, why should I vote for the one with the least political experience?
Well, you shouldn't, because I have the most political experience. I got involved in the political movement when I was 12 years old. And I've been involved in social policy for the last 30 years. So don't confuse people that have a job with political experience. So 20 years later, now my turn to ask you, of all the Republican candidates out there, why should someone vote for you, the one with the least political experience? And I might add, you've never held office. You've only voted twice in the last few elections. You don't even vote regularly. And you support Donald Trump, who never held office until he was president. Well, you putting a different standard on me, but I won't even make the racial application there. Why should we vote for you?
Listen, at the age of 18, I think you persuaded me on that one, that political experience is not the same as holding office. To tell you the truth, the reason I came out there and I was intrigued.
Can I put out right-wing press that Sharpton converted a young, well, I don't want to take credit for
to believe outside of political experience, I'm going to tell you the truth. One of the things, I'll even give you one more for you, okay? You were the only anti-war candidate back then. I was against the Iraq War. As I recall, you were the only anti-war candidate in either party. Well, guess what? Tables turn now. I'm the only true anti-war candidate in either political party now when it comes to Ukraine. I believe in America First policies. I think this Ukraine war does not advance American interests. I was the only person with the courage to say that on the Republican debate stage last week. The real war I would take on is the war against the administrative state, the shadow government here at home. I think the people who we elect to run the government, once again, ought to be the people who actually run the government, not the cancerous bureaucrats in Washington, D.C. I'll have a 75% headcount reduction for all of the people who weren't elected in Washington, D.C. So this is a very different vision than you hear amongst traditional Democrats for sure, but even amongst traditional Republicans. I want to shut down the administrative state. I want to declare independence from China. I want to grow our economy by drilling and fracking and embracing energy. And I want to revive national pride in this country. That's not a Republican idea or a Democratic vision.
It is a pro-American vision. That's what I stand for. It's why I'm in this race.
I would take issue that when I opposed the war in Iraq and going for weapons of mass destruction that wasn't there, so I ended up being right. You can't compare that to the United States supporting Ukraine defending itself against Russia. So that's
Look, I think there's a myth that Ukraine's actually, I think I was against the Iraq war then, but I'm consistent now. Ukraine is not some democracy that we've now painted it to be. I think this is a regime that really has some serious flaws as well.
Ukraine is in a,
so I think I respectfully disagree with you.
strategic place where
I respectfully
we have
disagree that I do not think
surrounded. But all right, we can agree to disagree on
Ukraine
that.
is not a NATO ally, and Ukraine doesn't advance U.S. interests. So that's one of the things that's distinctive about my views.
We disagree respectfully on that. Now, NBC is reporting that you were once a recipient of a fellowship for immigrants and children of immigrants from the Soros Foundation. You were awarded the fellowship in 2011 to support your studies at Yale Law School. And the issue is that you, the child of Indian immigrants, are now accusing some immigrants of carrying out an invasion of the United States. And that as president, you would make it more difficult for children of immigrants born here to participate in the political process. The floor is yours to explain how you enjoyed from it, that you Sharpton convinced you could run for president. Soros helped you through college. Explain all of this.
Come on. So you know what's really kind of funny about this? That you draw a distinction between legal and illegal immigrants like it doesn't exist. And I think that's a major problem in this country. I think that we need to use our own military to secure our own southern border. Not an armed invasion across somebody else's random border, but across our own border right here in the United States of America. I stand for that. I believe in the rule of law. My parents came to this country legally, through the front door, followed the rules, paid their taxes, raised 2 kids. Both of us went on to found companies that helped thousands of Americans. But that also means that your first act of entering this country cannot break the law. That's part of what it means to be an American. We believe in the rule of law. So yes, I want to end funding for sanctuary cities, end foreign aid to Mexico and other countries.
You have no problem
illegal immigration.
with helping,
I am a hardliner on. Absolutely.
You have no problem with helping those immigrants that come here and follow the law and become citizens.
I want to help every legal citizen of this country. That's what America First means, putting every American first. And you see how I run this campaign? It's very different. I've gone to the south side of Chicago, to Kensington, in the middle of Philadelphia.
Right.
I haven't called Zelensky, but I have called people in West Maui. America First means every American.
All right, let me
but
ask
that
you
means
this.
you have to come to this country
this.
legally, not illegally.
Let me ask you this. You say we run the country with a nation of laws and that we ought to follow the laws. Then how can you and your colleagues stand on a debate stage and say that you would endorse and support for president a man if he was convicted of breaking the law and a felony in Donald Trump? How can you say, I will put a convict back in the White House, and you say that I'm
the way our
supporting
Constitution
the law?
and laws of this country work? First of all, I'm running to be the next president, and I expect to be the next president because I want to reunite this country in a way that we badly need. But I have made a pledge to be on that debate stage, and I intend to keep it because I think the way we do things in the United States of America is that the people of this country get to decide who governs, not the administrative police state. So for better or worse, if it's a guy I disagree with or a guy I agree with,
I'm talking
in this
about
case,
if
Donald
he
Trump, I
was
do agree with most of his
convicted
policies.
Of the crime.
But
the question
either
posed
way,
to you all
you got to follow the Constitution.
You
have to follow the Constitution.
Of a crime. If the Constitution is clear,
so the
if he's
Constitution
of
does not eliminate you.
Conduct, he's eliminated. Let me then put it to you this way.
The Constitution governs. I believe in the Constitution, and the Constitution says we have a process for picking presidents in this country. I think we should follow it. I expect to follow it. I expect to be the next president. But even if it's not me, I will support anyone who follows that process.
If you became president, would you pardon Donald Trump for any of the crimes that he's been indicted for, or if he's convicted?
On the current facts that we have, he is one of many people that I have identified as someone I would pardon because I do not think that this sets a good precedent for our country, where a party in power uses police force to indict its political opponents in the middle of an election. There are Democrats on that list.
Wait a minute. You've got
matter.
19 people indicted. They're not running all of them. But even before you've heard the evidence, before the trials, you're saying that you would prejudge what he's going to come out and try and commit to pardoning them.
That's not
Yet
correct.
You claim
that's not correct. I've actually been very clear on this, Reverend. Assuming that the prosecution's statement of the facts in the indictment is the worst version of the facts, then yes, I would. So I waited till I read the indictments, cover to cover. In 99% of prosecutions, you and any lawyer will also know this. That's the worst statement of the facts you're going to get for the defense.
But it's not all that's going to come out at trial. You and I know that. That's not all that's going to come out at trial. So what I said is assuming, well, I was very clear at the time. I said I've read the indictment, and assuming these are the worst facts, then yes, on these facts, I will pardon Trump. Just as, by the way, I've said I would pardon Julian Assange, who, by my best guess, has very different politics than I do. Because, again, we applied a different standard to Julian Assange. Because when you talk about the law, you've also said that, I remember there was the big argument about you saying that people having the right to guns had something to do with slavery. When the Second Amendment was in 1791, slavery didn't end until 1865. I mean, you're very, very...
Well, I can actually share with you something about this. Chief Justice Taney, and you and I probably have some common ground here. In the Dred Scott case, which said that black people could not be citizens in the U.S., shamefully, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court gave his argument for why. He said it would allow black people to own guns in this country. That is shameful. Yes, it is part of our history. But just because some people may be for gun control today, we can't sweep that under the rug.
They didn't do the Second Amendment to help. Blacks couldn't get guns and fight. There were no, they were not fighting to give blacks guns. And when Taney said that,
so literally, that was the justification in the Dred Scott case for why black people couldn't be citizens.
Dred Scott
and the first
decision was done, by the way. But one last thing.
It was before the Civil War, as you well know. And I think that we should confront our history and have an open and honest debate about it. That's what makes us stronger as a country.
Until the 13th Amendment, we couldn't vote
our history and confront it.
Let me ask you one last question. We're out of time.
And that's how we unite this country.
One thing we have in common with Trump is you've been criticized for trafficking in conspiracy theories. So here goes, do you believe, let me ask you this, because you and Trump have both been accused of trafficking conspiracy theories. Do you believe Barack Obama was born in the United States, and do you think it was appropriate for Trump to suggest to otherwise, even as evidence mounted, that the claim was a lie?
I think I have every reason to believe Obama was born in the U.S., and I have never brought up that issue, and I have no idea why we're actually discussing that. But what I have talked about is, for example, Saudi Arabia was absolutely involved in 9/11, despite the fact that our government refused to acknowledge it. That COVID-19 did originate in a lab in China, despite the fact that our government called that a conspiracy theory. That we still haven't seen the transgender shooter manifesto out of Nashville. So those aren't conspiracy theories. Those are conspiracy realities. That's what matters.
Barack Obama was born in Kenya. He's a man that you said was the best president this century. Should he have continued trafficking the Kenya lie about Barack Obama?
Look, I will say, as a presidential candidate before he ran for president, I think he made absolutely the right decision to say that that was a ridiculous theory. Barack Obama was born in the United States. And frankly, I don't think we should dignify the things that aren't true versus talking about the hard things that were labeled conspiracy theories, but that are true now. So I actually believe in truth over theory. I'm tied to facts.
All right, well,
Vivek is the only person, I think, who hasn't practiced politics for a living. Correct.
Yeah, I'm not a practitioner.
No, you're not. You're not a practitioner. So it's interesting. Let me just start with a very quick overview. You've been traveling around the country for the past, 3 months, 4 months?
Yeah, 4 months.
How do you think the country's doing?
I think the country is doing poorly, is the answer. I think that we have a void in our country. I'm the first millennial ever to run for U.S. president as a Republican. And I see people my age in particular across this country who are not doing well because we're starved for purpose and meaning. The people are looking to be part of something bigger than ourselves, and yet we've lost the things that used to ground us. Faith, patriotism, hard work, family. These things are gone, and so we're lost in the wilderness, and then we latch on to whatever the other side serves up for us. You could wokeism, transgenderism, climatism, whatever it is. These are symptoms, drug addiction, depression, suicide, you name it. These are symptoms of a deeper void of purpose and meaning in our country.
But Tucker, I think the good news in that is I think our country's not doing well, but I think that this is also our opportunity as a movement to level up and fill that void, that vacuum, with our own vision. Individual, family, nation, God. When I talk to young people about this, they're more interested in that than they are in race, gender, sexuality, and climate. And so we got to start running to something as Americans, and if we do, I'm confident that our country will be doing well again. That's where I'm at.
Is it my imagination, or are people who weren't raised in traditional religious households, who haven't spent a lot of time thinking about theology, all of a sudden talking about God a lot? Do you notice that?
I do notice that, actually, and I think this is a good sign because there's an old expression, right? If there's a hole the size of God in your heart and God does not fill it, something else will instead. That's what's happened in the last decade in our country. Something else, some secular religion has filled that void, but it hasn't really satisfied our moral hunger, right? And so that's kind of, that effect is fading, and I think people are hungry to turn back to the real thing. The conversation's coming up, but they say it with a kind of prudishness.
Yes.
Right? God is a four-letter word. It's sort of a thing you have to tiptoe around. And I think that right now, family's the same way. The nuclear family makes some people uncomfortable when I say it, but actually this is the best known form of governance to mankind. And so if we start talking more about, hey, that's what we're running to. That's actually what we stand for. Yes, we are one nation. I'm a citizen of this nation, not some nebulous global citizen somewhere else. That it is one nation under God. Yes, it is a nation that is stronger when we ground ourselves in the unit of the family. Then I notice something happens, especially for younger people across the country, Tucker, is they're more open to that message than they thought, but they need someone to serve it up to them. And I think I'm the first non-politician, but I'm also a younger person in this race. I don't have a ton of experience running governments before. But I think in reaching younger people, that's something I feel called to do in this race. And it's why we're traveling college campuses across this country. And I am optimistic about what I see.
Well, since you are a younger person and spend time with them, we saw yesterday that a group of reservists has been called up to Europe, apparently, to prepare for war with Russia. Of people in the age cohort who might plausibly be called up to do that, what's the response?
I think there is no basis for us to send our young men and women, our sons and daughters, people my age or any age, to go defend somebody else's border halfway around the world when we should be using our own military to secure our own border in this country. And I will not apologize for that. We have to put the interests of this country first. And one of the things that does frustrate me, Tucker, is that this is one issue where I so love many of the other people who are running for this nomination for president. I think most of us and the entire field I speak for are in this for the right reasons. We are people who care about our country and want to deliver our country to a better place. But on this issue, nearly our entire field is indistinguishable in practice from where Biden is on this, which is in an undefined, ill-defined way pouring more money into a war that I think is destined to become Vietnam or Iraq all over again. And if you don't learn from the lessons of the past, you're going to be making the same mistakes on an even larger scale going forward. We have to end this war. We can end this war and start prioritizing the interests of actual U.S. citizens here at home.
I think, judging by the response you just got, I think a chunk of, I don't know what percentage, but a lot of Republican primary voters agree with you. Not all, but a lot. I don't think any Republican donors agree with you.
I think that's accurate. And I've lost, to be really honest with you, I've lost many large donors or prospective donors over this issue. And it puzzles me. Because I think the tempting thing to say is to have some conspiratorial explanation that they have money at stake and government contractors, Raytheon or whatever. I don't think that's true, actually. I think there's something else going on in the psychology of an establishment in both the Republican Party and the Democrat Party that is reluctant to the idea that we somehow can't be the ones fighting the war that's the popular war of the day, the politically correct war. I think there's no such thing as a politically correct war. And so what I ask is, how are we actually going to end this conflict in a way that advances U.S. interests? And the thing that puzzles me, Tucker, is nobody in either party is talking about this right now. The Russia-China alliance is the single greatest threat that the U.S. actually faces today. And we are pushing Russia closer into China's arms by actually continuing to arm Ukraine. So what I've said is that I would negotiate a deal that ends the Ukraine war, frees the current lines of control. Yes, that means giving part of the Donbas region to Russia. I would make a hard commitment that NATO never admits Ukraine to NATO. And those seem like unspeakable words in certainly the Republican donor class. But we get something greater in return, which is that Putin, in that case, would have to exit his military partnership with China and remove nuclear weapons from Kaliningrad, which border Poland, and get the Russian military out of Cuba and Venezuela and the West. And this is a deal that Putin should do because he ends up winning. He gets things that he doesn't have today. But it secures American interests, too. And I do think in a weird way, it does take an outsider to get that job done. Because if you want someone to fix a problem, you don't turn over the keys to somebody who actually broke the thing in the first place. If you want to fix it, maybe have somebody who didn't break it in the first place. And that's part of why I'm in this race as an outsider.
Okay. Well, since you're getting radical now, let's go through a list of all the other things you're not allowed to say. So you've just said, you know, you're not attacking anybody, but this doesn't seem to be helping us. In fact, it seems to be creating an alliance that we can't beat, and really, it's pretty scary. So let's just go through the list. Another thing you can't say is that maybe January 6th, while appalling on one level, maybe it was not an insurrection.
So let me talk about, I haven't talked about this much in the campaign. I'll be very honest with you. You want to know what caused January 6th? There's such a temptation to say that there's one man whose name is unspeakable. We can't.
No, first of all, it's QAnon. It's QAnon.
It's QAnon. You want to know what caused January 6th? Is pervasive censorship in this country in the lead up to January 6th. You tell people in this country they cannot speak, that is when they scream. You tell people they cannot scream, that is when they tear things down. And so the reality is, we were told that you could not question where the virus came from when we all knew it came from a lab in Wuhan, which now they admit. We were told that you could not send a private message to someone on the eve of an election that Hunter Biden's laptop story was actually a true story worth considering before an election. You were systematically suppressed. So think about this. You told you had to be locked down, had to take a vaccine that was mandated and forced down your throat, stay locked down in your home while Antifa and BLM roam and burn the streets of this country. So that's the lead up of one full year of telling people you have to shut up, sit down, and do as you're told. And then you tell them, oh, there's an election where you didn't get the information that you needed, such as the Hunter Biden laptop story being real and suppressed. That's what caused January 6th, is a cycle of censorship in this country. And until we look ourselves in the mirror and admit truth on that, we will not move forward as a country. And I think that's the real cause. And we're not, and I'm sorry to say this, Tucker, but I think until we reckon with that reality, I worry that is the beginning of, it's a friendly parley compared to what's to come, unless we step up and speak truth, restore integrity, and actually lead us to who we are as a people, rather than sweeping the truth under the rug.
How can you, just as a philosophical question, a lot of the people who are pushing censorship, in fact, I would say almost all of them, in both parties, particularly the Democratic Party, claim they're doing so in order to protect democracy. But how can you have a democracy with censorship?
So you want to know the best measure of the health of a democracy? We're a constitutional republic, but I'll use lowercase d democracy as a fill-in, right? Couldn't resist.
People always applaud at that. I love that.
It's just the truth, though, right?
No, it is
We're
true.
a republic.
But the civics majors love it.
Yeah, that's great. But the best measure of the health of our American democracy, our constitutional republic, is the percentage of people who feel free to say what they actually think in public. That's the metric. It's not the number of ballots cast every November. That's just going through the motions. It is not some other metric of what the media says on a given day. It is the percentage of people who will say in public what they're willing to say behind closed doors. There's no doubt we're doing poorly. The culture is censorious enough. Now, if you say the government on top of that is using social media companies to do through the back door what government could not censor through the front door under the Constitution, that creates the real threat to lowercase d democracy. My litmus test is if Vladimir Putin was doing it and we would call it a threat to democracy, it's a threat to democracy when we do it on this side of the Atlantic as well. Okay, that's a good way of not pointing the finger at somebody else, but looking ourselves in the mirror and asking ourselves who we really are. And this is personal for me. I'm a Republican candidate for U.S. president. It feels still new to say that. Not a politician by nature, but I bring that fact up, now as of very recently, certainly polling reasonably well in the recent polls. And I bring that up because against that backdrop, Microsoft owned LinkedIn censored my social media account. They locked my account, said I can't get in to make statements that are factually grounded statements about climate change, about Biden's relationship with China, about the ESG movement's perpetuation of a climate cult in this country, all grounded in fact, saying that it violates their policies for hate speech, misinformation. And I'm not making this one up, they said violence in the email. And so in my case, look, I was able to publicize that. They were then claimed it was an error, restored the account, typical operating procedure. But it's that culture of censorship in our country that I think we also, I'm trying to do my part, where I was in Ottumwa, Eastern Iowa, earlier this week. Smaller event than this, but we're on the stage talking. Somebody walks in. She's screaming at the top of her lungs. At first I thought, usually if they're screaming, sometimes they're in favor of what you're saying, so I said, thank you. But I realized that actually, no, she...
When she bit you?
She came... So she was out of control, okay?
Yeah. I know her. Yeah. I ran into her at Dulles Airport last week. Yeah.
We've all seen a version of her, but the truth is, so security was escorting her out, and it felt wrong to me, right? Because she came here to make a point. She was totally wild in the way she was making it, but I'm watching her walk out the door. She's at the back of the room now, and I said, this doesn't feel right. Right? Because as I said earlier, you tell people they can't speak, that's when they scream. You tell people they can't scream, and she was screaming. That's when they're going to go tear something down. So I said, no, bring her back. We gave her the mic. I said, I promise, you ask your question, but I promise I get to answer it in return. She agrees to that. It turns out she's a pro-choice advocate, a my body, my choice person. I was going to the state legislature on Tuesday morning. I think she must have known that. Came to this event to protest my being there. But I give her the mic. She's just talking for, 3, 4, 5 minutes. But by the end of it, it actually turns out, the story comes out that she's a single mother who did bring her daughter into the world. And the things she was saying were things like, my daughter is successful. I don't want you to look down on me. And I thought it was beautiful that the more she started talking, the more she started making our very point of why we believe in protecting life. And so I said, disagreements aside, you are a mother. We celebrate that. The audience applauded. It's why I love Iowans.
Wow.
She broke down in tears and left. And so I'm moved by what is possible in our country. Our country is broken. We are spiritually broken. We have a spiritual void in this country. It is our job to step up and fill that void by practicing what we preach as conservatives. And so I'm hoping we're doing that. I love doing that in Iowa. It's been something that's really lifted me up in a way that was never an experience I had as a CEO or in business. I've never had these experiences as we've had in the last few months. And honestly, as broken as our country is, it leaves me optimistic about where we're headed.
And you can listen to people. It's okay.
Yeah, it's okay. It's not going to hurt you.
Okay, so it's so interesting. So you, I think the intro of you described some of it, but you're coming from a completely different world. It's not like you were mayor, state legislator. You're coming from business and technology and biotech. So what have you learned? How have your views changed since you immersed yourself in crowds of voters and started listening to people?
Yeah, so I think my views have changed in part by my belief that we're not as divided as they make it out to be, right? Because many CEOs in this country are frightened, right? Of speaking their mind openly. It actually stops, many of them will say, well, stops them from being donors to me, to maybe other causes. They're deathly scared because they believe that we're a nation at our breaking point. And in some ways, we are, because we let it get there. But one of the things I've been convinced of, I've changed my mind on, is that I don't think we're nearly as divided as we're taught to believe. But I went to the south side of Chicago. It's one of the places it's not really where the political advisors would tell you to go if you're in a Republican primary. I went to Kensington and downtown in the inner city of Pennsylvania, in Philadelphia. And I'll tell you, the people in those rooms, especially on the south side of Chicago, where they're converting South Shore High School into an encampment for migrants who they're spending $7,000 per person per month on. This is the supposedly far left, nearly entirely black, Democratic voting bloc. And I have never heard more eloquent cases for securing the border and actually prioritizing the interests of Americans than I heard in that room.
What did they say?
They said, what about us?
Yeah.
Was actually the right way to say that. And it came out in many ways where, look, we are Christians. We believe in treating these people humanely. But it's not right that they're spending $7,000 a month and getting baby formula when I couldn't find baby formula a year ago. I can't buy sneakers for my kids. They're providing sneakers for those kids. How does that work? How is that advancing my interests? And actually, you just reminded me of this. Many of them were asking me, as though I was on the side of it, of why on earth we're sending billions of dollars to Ukraine. So it was interesting to me that the traditional partisan boundaries as drawn are really sort of retrofitted. We're sort of shoehorning an old structure. We're sort of shoehorning the modern truth into sort of an antiquated view where I don't think the dividing line in our country is between Republicans and Democrats right now. I think it is between those of us who are pro-American, who believe in the ideals of this country, who will not apologize for those ideals, who will stand up and sacrifice for those ideals, and those of us who are, and it exists in this country, I mean, the Vice President's a great embodiment of this, anti-American. Those who wish to apologize for a nation founded on our ideals. And if you divide it up that way, it is not 50-50 anymore. It's not even close. It's easily 80-20 in our favor, and half the 20 are people younger than me who never learned what those ideals were in the first place. We're going to bring them along too. And I think we have an opportunity to do in this country in 2024 what Ronald Reagan did in 1980. Deliver a landslide election, call the bluff on the division. Much of it is artificial. I fell for it. Right? Even when I started this campaign, I'm running for a Republican candidate for U.S. president, I don't even talk about Republicans that much anymore. I try not to use the word. Not because it's a bad word, but because it doesn't mean anything. Right? If half the Republican, 3/4 of the Republican Party's got the same policy as Biden on the most important policy matter of our time, and if much of the Democratic Party, or at least people on the south side of Chicago, believe in using the military on the southern border and putting the interests of Americans first, I'm not sure those labels are doing much for us now. And one of the things, I actually just got this stat yesterday from my campaign, 40% of the donors to our campaign are first-time ever donors to the Republican Party in any form ever. And the normal number is 2%. So I think this should actually give us hope for possibility if we're willing to take the shackles off a little bit, relax a little bit on identity can be confining. Right? The left does this masterfully. You're black, therefore you can't achieve something. You're a woman, therefore you can't achieve something. Identity's confining. You can be imprisoned in the identities that you inherit. And I just want to be careful that we learn from the left, or learn including what not to do, to be confined and imprisoned by our own identity of what it means to be Republican. Let's just let that word go and instead ask the question of what it actually means to be an American today. That's the question of our time. And you ask people my age that question, you get like a deer in the headlights response. It's like, it's a blank stare initially. But on the other side of that is then an introspection to say, okay, there are certain ideals that we fought a revolution for in this country. Self-governance over aristocracy, sovereignty as a nation, free speech, meritocracy. That you get ahead in this country, not on the color of your skin, but on the content of your character and contributions. That's what it means to be an American. That's what we're running to. And honest to God, Tucker, I think that if we do this right, if we actually prioritize our vision, what we stand for, I think it's going to be a landslide election for I'm not going to say a Republican candidate, a pro-American candidate in this race.
It's just interesting because what you didn't mention, so I asked you, you've been traveling around the country. It sounds like you went to Kensington on the south side. You've really kind of been to the span of the country. I watch media coverage, and everything's about race. And America is divided by race. That's America's original sin. It's the thing that cleaves us as a country. You didn't mention that. So why do they keep telling me that?
They blow what I call woke smoke to deflect accountability for their own failure, actually. So what do you think affirmative action has done for black people in this country? Nothing. What do you think? It's been negative. It's created racism that otherwise would not have existed. I've seen it. I have hired black executives at companies I have founded on merit. I could care less for the skin color. And then behind closed doors, people will say, well, that person got their job because of race, because they're jealous because they weren't good enough to get the job. But that is sad. It's unfair to everyone involved. They'll blow woke smoke. They'll say math is racist. When in fact, what might be wrong is not teaching kids in the inner city for a year under COVID lockdowns how to do math. And then they're using this to cover up for that failure. I personally think that's actually what's going on in the U.S. military, too. Right? People wonder about where's this wokeness in the military coming from. I mean, our military has been disastrous in defining its purpose, how we're actually using the resources of a military to fight wars that we haven't actually shown great value from in the last 25 years. So let's just talk about systemic racism and white rage instead. It's a deflection mechanism. Companies do it. The military does it. Schools do it. Teachers' unions do it. It's irrelevant. And in fact, what would they ever do without those poor black kids who they could hold out as the sacrificial lambs for their own failures? What we actually need to do is to level up and say, no. Regardless of the color of your skin, how are we going to be a country that ensures opportunity, black, white, man, woman, doesn't matter? My parents came to this country with almost no money. I've gone on to found multi-billion-dollar companies. And then people tell me, oh, that's because you had privilege. They tell me white privilege. It's sort of weird. It's sort of an interesting. It's kind of interesting.
Do you tell them?
I say, take the blindfold off, and now you have your answer. But the interesting answer is actually what I do tell them, Tucker, is that I did have privilege. I didn't grow up in money, but I had two parents in the house, a mother and a father, with a focus on education and a faith in God. And you know what? That is the ultimate privilege. That if I'm going to enjoy that, every kid in this country ought to enjoy it too.
Do you think, I just have to ask you this, because you're not a political professional, do you think Biden's going to be the nominee?
So it depends on who the Republican nominee is. I'm running because at this point, actually, my heart says, I couldn't have told you this in February. I launched on your show, and honest to God, when I left, I had no idea how this thing was going to go. My gut instinct is that I will be the nominee and in a position to win this in a landslide versus Biden. And they will not let Biden run against me. So I believe that if I am the nominee, they will not let Biden run. It is why they're holding in the back pocket the documents case against Biden. It is why they're holding in the back pocket everything else that you're wondering why they're not charging or bringing now. It's not a Democrat or Republican thing. It's a managerial class, deep state bureaucratic class versus elected official puppets thing. And so they're not going to have to use that if it's Trump because they think based on, they don't analyze, they analogize. They say we did it. We can debate that, but we appear to have done it. We appear to have done it, and so we'll do it again. So if it's Trump, they're going to run Biden. If it's me, there's no way they let Biden run. It's going to be a new puppet, Gavin Newsom, Michelle Obama, you name it. It doesn't matter to me, though, because for me, whoever it is, I'm not running against anybody in this primary field, and I'm going to keep that philosophy in the general. I'm not running against whichever puppet they put up, Biden or somebody else. I'm running for our vision of what it means to be a citizen of this nation, the United States of America. I'm leading us to something, and nobody else is going to get in the way.
Thank you. Vivek, good to see you.
Good to see you, Tucker.
Disgraceful thing. And Republicans can't let them get away with it. The Republicans have to be tough. The Republicans are great in many ways, but they don't fight as hard for this stuff, and they have to get a lot tougher. And if they don't, they're not going to have much of a Republican Party.
Well, they haven't been very tough on Donald Trump. And one of the Republicans who is defending Trump is Vivek Ramaswamy. And today, a memo from Ron DeSantis' super PAC laid out some advice for the Florida governor ahead of next week's debate. Among the suggestions, defend Donald Trump, but, quote, take a sledgehammer to Ramaswamy. And joining me now is the candidate mentioned in that memo, Vivek Ramaswamy. He's giving a speech at the Nixon Library tonight. Welcome, Mr. Ramaswamy. Appreciate you joining us.
It's good to see you, Jim. How are you?
I'm good. Hey, let's get right to this. A pro-DeSantis super PAC, I'm sure you've seen this, has posted documents online that show DeSantis' upcoming debate strategy, and that includes not only attacks on President Biden as well as media, but instructions to, quote, hammer Ramaswamy. Are you preparing to be hammered?
You know, I have been prepared for that for a lot of my life, and I'm prepared to take that on. The truth is I'm an outsider in this race, and I think that is threatening a lot of the professional politicians, understandably. A guy like me is not supposed to be in this race, according to their book. I'm approaching my debate strategy a little bit differently. I think many times if you don't have a message, you look to attack other candidates. I'm preferring to stand for my own message, asking the question, what are we running to? And I think if we're guided by that purpose, the attacks from the other candidates are not going to stop me.
And the latest Fox polling shows you've gained more ground since June than any other candidate. Why are you gaining ground while candidates like Ron DeSantis are struggling to catch on?
I think the reality is I'm unconstrained in speaking the truth. There are many forces at work in both political parties, in the establishment of the Democrat Party and the Republican Party alike, that constrains what candidates can actually say. A lot of that comes from the donor class. In the Republican Party, you have a lot of super PAC puppets. I'm not one of them. I am a patriot who speaks the truth. I am independent. I am putting my own money into this campaign precisely to avoid taking a tin can with a hat in hand, asking a bunch of donors for permission to run. And I think that's a very different model from many of the other professional politicians in this race. And the good news is voters across our country, in our base, they can tell the difference between somebody who's actually sharing their own convictions versus somebody who's parroting off talking points served up to them 15 minutes or 15 days before a debate. I think the reality is also the message of my campaign is resonating. Shut down the administrative state. Declare independence from China. Grow the economy. Revive national pride. Revive our national identity itself. We as conservatives, we can't just be complacent with criticizing the radical Biden agenda. That's boring. It's trite at a certain point in time. We have to stand for a vision of our own. And I think I'm the only candidate who's actually offering that. I think that's a big part of why we've been successful.
Well, you've got a big test coming up with next week's debate, and 8 candidates, including yourself, have met the donor and polling threshold for that debate. You've signed the loyalty pledge. Former President Donald Trump has refused to sign the pledge. Are you okay with Trump getting special treatment? Shouldn't he have to play by the rules?
I expect Trump to be on that debate stage later this fall, and I expect him to play by the same set of rules of everybody else, but I am fine with him missing the first couple of debates. He's been on that debate stage many times over. Heck, he was president for 4 years. For me, this is an opportunity to introduce myself to the country. I'm looking forward to that. Many people don't yet know who I am or don't really know certainly very well who I am. And so that's the opportunity I'm looking forward to. I do expect President Trump to show up down the line, but I think it's fair game for him to miss the first couple.
What if he doesn't sign that pledge, just refuses to sign it? Does he get a pass on that?
Look, I think if that's a condition to make the debate stage, then I think he's going to sign that pledge to make the debate stage. But the reality is, I believe he's waiting, based on his public comments at least, it seems like he's waiting for a smaller field. So I look forward to being on that debate stage with him. But for now, I'm focused on the path to next Wednesday. I'm in 8 states in the period heading up to between now and the debate stage. But I'm looking forward to introducing myself to the people of this country and hopefully drawing some important policy contrasts from the rest of the field. I think this is an important moment for the GOP to stop obsessing over the who. There's been so much obsession over Donald Trump or somebody else. Forget the who for a second. Let's first focus on who we are, but what do we stand for and why we stand for it. That's a discussion we actually haven't had in the GOP for a very long time. And I think this debate stage is actually going to be good for the evolution of our party, really defining our agenda rather than devolving into biographical brawls, even though certain other candidates say Ron DeSantis and his super PAC want him to go the direction of the biographical brawl. I prefer to go in the direction of substance, answering what we stand for and why. That's what's going to make our party stronger.
Well, I think the former president is going to come up at the debate whether he's there or not, and he's now facing his 4th criminal indictment, this time in Georgia on forgery, false statements, election fraud, and racketeering charges. You have said that these are political or politicized prosecutions, politicized persecutions through prosecution. Let's listen to what his former attorney general is saying about this.
People who defend him say that he genuinely did feel that he was robbed, and this was the good fight and the proper fight.
Well, even if he did, and I am dubious about that, but even if he believed that, that doesn't mean you can use illegal means to rectify it. If you think the bank is unfairly keeping your money, there are many things you can do to get it back. You can't go and rob the bank.
Yeah, what's your response to the former Attorney General?
Look, I think there are deep legal flaws with this case. I'm talking to you from the Nixon Presidential Library, where I'm delivering a speech later tonight. We'll look at Nixon versus Fitzgerald. This is something that the press has altogether ignored. A president's acts while in office are something that he actually enjoys immunity for, other than through the impeachment process. So if he believes, even incorrectly, that he was looking after election fraud, that alone could be a defense. I also think there are deep due process failures. Let's start with the fact that they actually, Fulton County, publicly posted the charges of the indictment even before the grand jury had signed them. That's a grave prosecutorial, bushy-tailed, overexcited mistake. That's a due process violation that itself could be grounds for a motion to dismiss. We also have to look at this prosecution in the context of the fact that there are 3 others, now 4 prosecutions in a series of months, all convening around a presidential election that sets a god-awful precedent, Jim, for this country. We do not want to become a nation where the party in power uses multiple different legal cases at the same time, pushing untested novel legal theories to knock out its opposition in the middle of a presidential election. That is not how we do things in the United States of America. And I say this as somebody who in many national polls is now polling second. It would be easier for me if Donald Trump were eliminated from competition. That is not how I want to win. I stand on the side of principle, not politics.
There are now 4 different
when I say
indictments.
We need to unite this country.
Yeah, let me jump in. There have been 4 different indictments. You don't think he's committed any crimes in any of these indictments?
I don't think any of the indictments have demonstrated that he committed a crime, no. And I've written on the pages of the Wall Street Journal and elsewhere wearing a technical legal hat, and you and I can go into that detail if you're
Refusing
interested.
to return
but
classified
I think these are
documents?
clearly politically motivated. Well, let's just take that one as an example. That indictment made 0 mention of the Presidential Records Act, the most recently passed act that relates to a president, including an outgoing president's access to documents. The fact that this is a 49-page indictment, that one was, that was silent on that fact, reveals smacks of politicization. I also think that the fact that they used the Espionage Act, one of the most un-American acts in U.S. history, that has been used to round up anti-war activists, that was used to lock up Eugene V. Debs when he ran for president.
But do you think it's okay to have classified documents? You think it's okay for you to have classified documents laying around the Ramaswamy household?
No, it's not. But I think that there's a difference between a bad judgment and a crime. And the Presidential Records Act expressly gives the U.S.
asked for the documents back, and he didn't return them. They asked for the documents back.
Again, I would have made very different judgments.
Yeah.
Look, Jim, I am running in the same race that Donald Trump is. So I'm not saying that every judgment he made was the same judgment I would make. In fact, it wasn't. But that is different from charging it as a crime, which I think sets an awful precedent in our country. If you want to get a little
technical
about it,
But in the federal election case, he lied about the election. He tried to overturn the election results. Why not call him out for that as well?
I will remind you the Supreme Court's precedent in Alvarez, a 2012 case, which held that public officials, including politicians, have a First Amendment right to lie, to tell the truth, to even make statements they didn't believe, let alone the fact that there isn't a shred of evidence to suggest that Trump didn't even believe his own claims. And so we can get into the legal technical details all we want. That's going to happen in the courtroom. But as a matter of judgment, as somebody who is running to and expects to be the next president of the United States, my top job is to reunite this country. And my way of doing that is going to be to pardon Donald Trump on day one and to pardon really anybody else who was also the victim of a politically motivated persecution through prosecution. We have to move forward as a country. And I think this sets a dangerous precedent unless we actually pardon.
But Mr. Ramaswamy, you just said you want to wait for all the details, the technical details to come out at trial, but you're declaring beforehand that you would pardon him. Why not listen for the facts to come out at trial and then make that determination?
I'm saying it based on one assumption. The assumption is that the statements in each of the indictments are the most prosecution favorable statements we're going to get. Any legal scholar would tell you that is a fair assumption. In any case, the prosecution always puts up its strongest foot in the indictment itself. We haven't even heard from the defense. So yes, if there are gaping
surprises that come up. I mean, there's zero evidence to suggest that Trump was selling those secrets to foreign adversaries for private gain. But if those facts come up, of course, I would revisit my judgment. But the fact of the matter is the prosecution obviously makes the most aggressive statement of its case in the indictment. And assuming that's the case here, as it is in any other case, I will absolutely pardon Trump on day one, January 20th, 2025, when I'm in office.
Would you pardon Trump's other alleged co-conspirators in both the documents and the election cases?
It depends on how the facts match up to the law. I mean, take about the documents case. There are special features of the law that apply to a U.S. president. Literally, the Presidential Records Act treats past U.S. presidents.
But
the law
why
does
say you would pardon Trump
than
on
it
day
does
one,
other
but
actors.
not? But why say you're going to pardon Trump on day one, but not make that kind of blanket promise to the alleged co-conspirators? Shouldn't they get that kind of same pardon offer?
I'm favorably inclined. I'm favorably inclined to do it. But right now, I'm a competitor against Donald Trump in this primary, and I want to be very clear on the side of principle. Though it's against my interest in this race, that's why I think in the interest of uniting this country, it is especially important to be clear about that fact. I expect to maybe making tens of pardons on day one. I think there are countless Americans who have been the victims of politically motivated persecutions through prosecution. Peaceful protesters on January 6th, January 6th defendants who actually have had constitutional due process violations. Julian Assange is someone I've specifically identified as somebody I would absolutely pardon. Ross Ulbricht, Douglas Mackey, others. But I think that the only way we're going to move forward as a country, there can be no reconciliation without truth. We have to put that past behind us. And my top job is going to be to heal the wounds of this nation, to lead us forward. Because even look at the conversations
pardoning
we're
Trump
having
is going to heal the wounds. Pardoning Trump is going to heal the wounds of the nation.
I do. I do think it will be a step towards healing the wounds of the nation. I think there are deep wounds in this country that are the consequence of systematic censorship, the weaponization of police force to accomplish political goals through the justice system. That is wrong. This is not an easy project ahead for the next president. I am in this race because I do see a lot of candidates on both sides motivated by vengeance and grievance. I am motivated by leading this nation forward. And the way we're going to do it is by restoring one standard of the rule of law for all Americans, restore the integrity of the justice system, and leave politics to politics. The people of this country should decide who the next president is. They're free to take into account all of the information that has been laid out by left-wing media, right-wing media, etc., to make their decisions. If they didn't think Donald Trump made good decisions, then they should take that into account when voting him out. But that is not the basis for a prosecution.
What about Trump making these threats and making these kinds of inflammatory comments about the judge, about the special counsel, and so on in some of these cases? Do you defend that? Should he knock that off?
I'm not familiar with the specific nature of which inflammatory comment you're referring to or not. He's clearly deeply aggrieved by the fact that he's being prosecuted through 4 separate cases that have arisen at the same time in the middle of an election. Again, from my vantage point, I would make very different judgments and would have made very different judgments than Donald Trump. But that is a different point than saying this should be criminalized. That's where I'm at. So I'm not in this to defend
he says, I'm coming
Trump
after
or
you if
anybody
you're
else.
coming
I'm in this
after
to
me.
defend the nation.
But you've heard him say, you've heard how he said, I'm coming after you if you come after me. I mean, you've heard that, correct? Is that appropriate?
I mean, if he means that he's going to file a motion, if he means he's going to file a motion to dismiss, then he should absolutely file a motion to dismiss, which I think will be very embarrassing for the prosecutor and, frankly, very embarrassing for the entire
you don't think that that's
law
what he means
enforcement
when he
apparatus,
says that?
if that's indeed granted.
But you don't think that's what he means when he says that?
I'm going to be very honest with you. I have not.
Isn't there a threatening undertone there?
You've clearly studied every word. Look, I'm going to be very honest with you, Jim. I have not read the specific tweet or social media post that you're referring to. I'm running for president. I'm looking at reviving our economy and declaring independence from China. I'm not parsing every social media post from every one of my other candidates. But broadly speaking, my whole point is there's a difference between a bad judgment and a crime. And the moment that we conflate
a lot of crimes
the
start
two,
with bad judgments,
that
don't
is
they?
the moment that we have a threat to liberty.
Yeah.
Well, that's okay, but you actually have to have committed a crime to be prosecuted for one. So making a very bad judgment as a politician, that's a basis for a voter to make a decision. But that's how we've got to do things in the United States of America. We have to let the people of this country decide who actually runs the country, not a federal administrative police state. And I just think that sets a dangerous and deeply problematic precedent in this country. And that is why I've been so vocal against it, That is why I'm clearly committed to pardoning Donald Trump if he is convicted.
But you said earlier you would wait for the facts to come out. If there are some big surprises, you may reconsider that.
My assumption is that the worst statement of the facts, the most favorable version of the facts, is in the indictment. In 99.9% of legal cases, that's exactly how it works in the United States. And I said that on day one when I made my commitment that was my assumption.
Let's talk about China. You talked about China. You proposed to radio host Hugh Hewitt this week that the U.S. should help Taiwan deter a Chinese invasion until the U.S. has achieved, quote, semiconductor independence. Does it really serve our long-term interest to say we support territorial integrity until a country is no longer useful to us?
I think that moving from strategic ambiguity to strategic clarity is actually a good thing for the United States to both advance our interests and to avoid war, as well as to be a more trusted partner. I don't think it's credible when we make hollow proclamations to defend democracy or to defend territorial sovereignty as a principle when, in fact, we choose that principle selectively anyway. I think it's far more credible for us to be honest, to say that I will, as the next U.S. president, I stand for advancing American interests, period. That allows other nations to actually trust us. Just as we can trust them to follow their self-interest, they can trust us to follow ours.
But are you sending a signal that an allied
neoconservatism or liberal hegemony?
But are you sending a signal that an allied democracy could be taken over by another power just because they're no longer making something that we need?
Well, let's get real, Jim. I mean, the fact of the matter is our current posture towards Taiwan is that the U.S. embraces the one China policy in the status quo. The standard protocol is a U.S. president isn't even supposed to pick up a phone call from the leader of Taiwan. In fact, when Trump did it, they laughed at him as though he was an outsider rube. And so the reality is that line of reasoning that somehow you're now going to call them an allied nation selectively to push back on my vision of strategic clarity is just a farce and betrays exactly what our current posture is in the first place. What I'm bringing to our foreign policy is honesty that will advance our interests. I'm moving from strategic ambiguity to be strategically very clear that we will defend Taiwan until we achieve semiconductor independence. I expect that to happen by the end of my first term, by 2028.
But then China
can
have Taiwan?
Our commitments necessarily will change.
But then China can have
To be clear,
Taiwan?
after that, by being clear, not necessarily. What that really means is Taiwan, between now and then, can actually spend what it should be spending on national defense. Taiwan spends less than 2% of GDP on its military. That is shameful. Taiwan needs to be spending over 4% of its own GDP. But by being strategically clear, we give Taiwan a chance to build up its own defense capabilities. And China will also know that it is absolutely not in China's interest, not any rational actor in China would want to make that move before 2028. In the meantime, what am I going to do? Achieve semiconductor independence for our nation and also build up our own homeland defense capabilities. That's something that's badly lacking. Super EMP defenses, cyber defenses, nuclear missile defenses. But if we're at that point by 2028, along with semiconductor independent, then no, I don't expect to want to send our sons and daughters in this country to die to fight over somebody else's territorial dispute. And I think that that's exactly what this Chinese Civil War dating back to 1949 was all about. There are two reasons why China might go after Taiwan. One is to lord over an economic gun over the United States. I refuse to let that happen. But a second is sorting out business dating back to 1949 between Chiang Kai-shek and Mao Zedong. That's not something that I'm going to send our sons and daughters to settle.
And you've also suggested that Vladimir Putin be allowed to keep parts of Ukraine as part of a way to solve that conflict. What if he wants parts of Poland?
You leave
next?
out the
What if
most
he
important
wants
part of that deal.
More of Ukraine next.
Aren't
you letting some of these
the most important
authoritarian
part of the
leaders
deal
off
is
the
what
hook?
actually advances? Far from it. I think that the Biden administration is so stubbornly attached to the idea of getting Xi Jinping to drop Vladimir Putin. What I think we need to be doing is get Vladimir Putin to drop Xi Jinping. Just like Nixon went to China in 1972, I think Putin is like the new Mao. I will visit Moscow, and I will pull Russia out of its military alliance with China. The Russia-China military alliance is the single greatest military threat that we face today. Hypersonic missile capabilities, nuclear capabilities in Russia, far ahead of us or China. A naval capacity in China ahead of ours, combined with an economy that we depend on for our modern way of life. Those two nations are in a military alliance with one another, and nobody in either political party is talking about it. Worst of all,
our engagement in Ukraine is further driving Russia into China's arms. So my foreign policy centers on weakening that alliance. That advances American interests.
But you would let Putin have
that
parts
is how
of
we
Ukraine.
actually secure peace.
But you would let Putin have
would
parts of Ukraine.
Freeze the current lines. I would freeze the current lines of control, and that would leave parts of the Donbas region with Russia. I would also further make a commitment that NATO will not admit Ukraine to NATO. But there are even greater wins that I will get for the United States in return. The top of the list. No, our goal should not be for Putin to lose. Our goal should be for America to win. That's what we have forgotten in this country, is that driving Russia into the ground is not a U.S. strategic goal. A U.S. strategic goal is to secure peace and prosperity for Americans. And so, you know what? I do think many of those military resources being used to protect against an invasion across somebody else's border halfway around the world should be used to protect against the invasion across our own southern border right here at home. And in the meantime, yes, we need to pull Russia apart from China instead of driving Russia further into China's hands. And I think we have a foreign policy establishment in both parties, frankly, Republican Party and Democratic Party alike, that behaves as though we're still in the Cold War of the last century, forgetting that the USSR does not exist anymore and that the real threat we face today is communist China, which is that much stronger when Vladimir Putin is in Xi Jinping's camp.
All right, Vivek Ramaswamy, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Jim.
And joining me now is the Republican presidential candidate that was at the center of the debate, Vivek Ramaswamy. Mr. Ramaswamy, welcome back to Meet the Press.
It's good to talk to you, Chad.
Let me start with the tragedy that took place in Jacksonville. This is what Sheriff Waters, how he described the incident last night.
The shooting was racially motivated, and he hated black people. He wanted to kill. He targeted a certain group of people, and that's black people. That's what he said he wanted to kill, and that's very clear. And I don't know that the targets were specific, but I know that any member of that race at that time was in danger.
Both the FBI and DHS in the last 2 years have said that racially motivated violent extremism is on the rise. This is clearly part of that. What would a President Ramaswamy want the Justice Department to do about this racially motivated violence that we're seeing on the rise?
I think that every criminal deserves to be punished to the fullest extent of the law, especially when they're carrying out premeditated crimes like this one. This is a heinous crime. My heart goes out to the families who were affected by this. It is tragic, and this should not be happening in the United States of America. I think the fact of the matter is, Chuck, it is really just a symptom of a deeper, new form of national division that we have created. And I think one of my top jobs as the next U.S. president is really to lead with a national tone of character that reminds us of how we are all united across our diverse attributes. I think part of the problem is we have obsessed so much over racial and other genetic differences that we have forgotten all of the ways we're really the same as a country. And I do think we need a leader and in the White House developing that national character for this country again. We also do have a mental health epidemic across this country, Chuck, that really is reflective of a hunger for purpose and meaning. We need to fill that void, address the mental health epidemic, but this is a tragedy and deserves to be called out as heinous. That's exactly what it was.
Why do you think there are more race-based violent crimes on the right than on the left? Why is this a lot more pervasive on the right?
Well, the fact of the matter is I think that there's a lot more violence that's also pervasive in parts of the country that supposedly are left-wing voter bases. So I don't think this is a left versus right issue, and I don't think we should try to politicize this through partisan goggles either, Chuck, especially in the wake of a tragedy like this one. The fact is there are more black men dying on the south side of Chicago.
Do you ignore the elements that allowed this manifesto to spread online, and that what we're, it does feel as if social media connects some of these hateful ideologies.
Well, the fact of the matter is I do think we have two standards that we're even applying if we're having a conversation about manifestos. We still have not yet even seen the manifesto of that transgender shooter in Nashville of a Christian school, and yet here we're focusing on the motive. So if we want to look at this through a politicized lens, let's look at what the political media and the political establishment is doing differentially in how they analyze different crimes and then create a new narrative around it. The fact is, what I said in the Nashville shooter case, I will say here. Any killing, any mass killing is heinous. We need to get to the root cause of the mental health epidemic, address that. We need leadership that sets the right tone in this country. But if we are going to talk about manifestos and politicization, Chuck, I think it is incomplete not to look at the absence of releasing that Nashville shooter manifesto even as of today. That's why I personally traveled to Nashville to call for it. And that, I think, is the best evidence of real politicization in terms of what the public sees and what the public doesn't. I want to apply one standard for everybody. I don't want to look at this through partisan goggles. I want to look at this through one standard of the rule of law for everybody.
You believe racism is a mental health issue?
Well, I do believe that racism in many cases is manufactured in a way that creates more racism in this country. I cannot think of a greater way, Chuck, of driving racism in this country than to take something else away from someone based on the color of their skin. And so, is there existing racism in the United States? Of course there is. But those last burning embers of racism, the last thing I want to do is throw kerosene on it. And yet that's exactly what I believe the modern culture is doing by creating race-based quota systems that deny people access to goods or services based on the color of their skin. The right answer to stop discrimination on the basis of race, as John Roberts said it, is to stop discriminating on the basis of race. And I am genuinely worried that we're seeing a new wave of anti-black and anti-Hispanic racism as a consequence of the so-called anti-racist movements.
Your argument comes across as blaming those that are trying to create equality for the rise in racism.
Well, the fact is, Chuck, I don't want to be playing a blame game. I want to be going towards a solution. And I am genuinely worried that those who earnestly espouse the view, I'm going to quote Ibram Kendi from his book directly, I'm not putting words in anybody's mouth, says the right answer to past discrimination is present discrimination. The right answer to present discrimination is future discrimination. I believe the people who hold that view are earnest about it, but I think they're wrong. And I think that that's actually creating more discrimination and more division in our country. And I think the right answer is actually to restore colorblind equality, colorblind meritocracy, embrace what unites us across our diversity instead of celebrating our skin-deep diverse attributes. That's how I think we reunite this country, Chuck. And it's not blaming anybody else for having a different point of view, but I do think that as a leader, it's my job to articulate exactly how we will unite this country. And that's exactly how I'm going to do it.
Let me move to the debate. And a lot of people are asking this question. If you believe Donald Trump is the greatest president of the 21st century, he's running. Why are you running against him? Why do you think his second term won't be as good as his first?
Well, look, I did say he's the best president of the 21st century. From George Bush to Barack Obama to Joe Biden to Donald Trump, I think it's not even close. Who was the best of those presidents? In my book, I judge by results. That being said, I believe I can take the America First agenda even further than Donald Trump did. I think I will be more effective in uniting this country in the process. Look at the way we're running this campaign. I'm not leaving any state behind, any city behind, no American left behind, from the south side of Chicago to Kensington, to places where traditional Republicans don't go. I think I am best positioned to deliver a landslide election, a multi-ethnic working class majority. And I do think that a landslide is what we need in this country, not another 50.1 election. And I'm the only candidate in this race who can actually deliver that.
Look, a Politico neophyte outsider became president and couldn't get a lot of the things done that he wanted to get done in Donald Trump. Why do you think somebody with less experience than Donald Trump had is somehow going to make the federal government function in a way that you're outlining?
So I think there's three things I would say. The first is we have that experience to learn from. I want to build on the foundation that Trump laid. Frankly, I will invite him as an advisor and a mentor. I don't want to relearn the same lessons. I want to pick up where he left off in taking on the administrative state. The second thing, Chuck, is I do think it needs to be an outsider to take on that administrative state, but I also think it needs to be an outsider who has a deep first personal understanding of the laws and constitution of this country. I think Trump was in many cases duped by his managerial advisors, for example, who said that you can't fire employees in the federal government due to civil service protections. Read the law. Turns out those civil service protections only apply to individual firings, not to mass layoffs. Mass layoffs are absolutely what I will bring to the DC bureaucracy. And I think the fact that I am from a different generation, Chuck, will be an asset. I'm able to reach young Americans. I'm able to reach people who haven't traditionally been brought into the mold of Republican politics. I don't even talk about Republicans and Democrats. And so I think I will be able to build a greater moral mandate across generations that helps unite Americans around the America First agenda rather than making it a strictly partisan affair.
Let me bring up a couple questions you didn't get a chance to answer at the debate. Most of the candidates on stage Wednesday night said Mike Pence did the right thing on January 6th. Do you agree?
I would have done it very differently. I think that there was a historic opportunity that he missed to reunite this country in that window. What I would have said is this is a moment for a true national consensus where there's two elements of what's required for a functioning democracy in America. One is secure elections, and the second is a peaceful transfer of power. When those things come into conflict, that's an opportunity for heroism. Here's what I would have said. We need single-day voting on Election Day. We need paper ballots, and we need government-issued ID matching the voter file. And if we achieve that, then we have achieved victory, and we should not have any further complaint about election integrity.
So what would
I would have
you have
driven
done
it through the Senate.
So what would you have done with Mike Pence? You would have not certified the election?
In my capacity as president of the Senate, I would have led through that level of reform. Then on that condition, certified the election results, served it up to the president.
Yeah.
President Trump then to sign that into law, and on January 7th, declared the re-election campaign pursuant to a free and fair election. I think that was a missed opportunity, but that's the kind of spirit we're going to need to unite this country rather than sweeping those concerns under the rug.
11 months ago, in your book, which wasn't written that long ago, you wrote, the fact that all of our governmental institutions so unanimously found no evidence of significant fraud is telling. Furthermore, I've talked to many Republicans at all levels of government, and not one has ever presented convincing evidence that the 2020 election was stolen from President Trump. Very few have seriously tried. I don't believe that most Republican politicians actually think the election was stolen. So you went from there,
let me address
and
this.
11 months later, your views have changed on January 6th. Again, this book was written September of 2022.
Chuck, I'm happy to address that if you're interested.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, and read exactly that chapter in the book. I drew a sharp distinction between what I did see as the interference in the election that mattered, which was interference by big tech. I'm data-driven. There's hard data showing that many voters, many independent voters, would have changed their result enough to influence the outcome of the election if they had been exposed to what we now know to be the truth about the Hunter Biden laptop story. By contrast, I've also been clear. I have not yet seen evidence that there was ballot fraud of a scale that would have changed that result. I'm just responding to data on both fronts. But the fact of the matter is, if we're looking at reuniting this country, there are serious concerns on both sides, but especially on the right, about the concern of elections and election interference and ballot fraud, but also big tech interference. And there's a very clear result and way we can address that. I've offered a clear consensus that everybody can get behind. It is practical. And if people really think that debating this issue is a threat to our democracy, that should be an easy consensus to be able to rally around, and that's how I'll lead as president.
First of all, you never talked about the tech stuff in your book. This is a new thing. It is
that's false, Chuck.
You have not talked about this Hunter Biden
in Nation of Victims
aspect of it. We were looking
Chuck,
for it.
I think you have not. I think you have not read Nation. I think you have not read Nation of Victims. Literally read the book. There was about 20 pages of content devoted to this, and I also bring it up in
You didn't write about
Woke.
election fraud that way.
It's fine,
but
you don't have an obligation to read my book. But if you do, quote it correctly.
We have been, and let me quote it again. You're referring to Republicans. We use stolen election theories as a backdoor to embracing our own victim identity path, pursuing an easy path to power. Throughout this entire book, you mock the entire January 6th aspect. You absolutely criticize Donald Trump for being a sore loser. You write about it in a way of making your point that we've become a nation of victims. And right now on TV, you're doing the exact opposite.
I'm not. Chuck, actually want to be very clear. I preached to conservative audiences I was in Iowa over the last 2 days, and what do I tell them? We're not going to be victims. We're going to be victorious. Whether I'm talking to the left or the right, I say the same thing. I've also been very clear, Chuck, and I want to be clear today, that I would have made very different judgments than Donald Trump did that day and on many of the matters in his path out of office. But there's a difference between a bad judgment and a crime. And what I've been clear about is when we criminalize those bad judgments, that's an abuse of the justice system. It undermines trust not only in our elections, but in our justice system. We have to be able to draw those distinctions. And I do think, Chuck, it's going to take that kind of leader who can actually preach truth to both tribes in this country to reunite this country. So did Donald Trump make all the right judgments? No, I said so then, I say so now. Was that illegal and should we criminalize it? Absolutely not. But I want to lead this nation forward. That is my goal, not to look in the rearview mirror. And in order to do that, I think on the election integrity issue, we have an opportunity to put this debate behind us by single-day voting on Election Day as a national holiday with paper ballots and government-issued ID. this should not be controversial. And if that helps reunite this country, as I believe it will, that's exactly how I must lead as president, and that's my commitment.
All right, again, from your book, No One Likes a Sore Loser. That's one of the worst victimhood complexes of all. Are you referring to Donald Trump?
I referred in that chapter both to Stacey Abrams and to Donald Trump. And I think that the answer is we need leaders who ultimately stand for victory over victimhood. We did have a victimhood culture that started on the left in this country, the oppression hierarchy. My worry, Chuck, is that that can spread to the right. And the way that this so-called culture war will end is not with a bang, but with a whimper, where each side imitates the methods of the other. That related even to some of our earlier conversation on seeing each other based on the color of our skin. I think that is deeply divisive. What we need in this country is to revive the shared ideals that unite all of us as Americans. The pursuit of excellence, meritocracy, free speech, the rule of law. I genuinely believe, Chuck, that most Americans, regardless of black or white, red or blue, share these ideals in common, and that's what I'm reviving.
I understand that, but again, let me go back to quoting you. The Republican Party seems to be moving towards the position that any races it wins are legitimate and any it loses were stolen. It's just the preferred conservative brand of victimhood, a knee-jerk kind of sore losing, more common to playground than great republics. You seem to, at the time you wrote your book, believe this was potentially damaging to the rule of law. This was not a way to have a democracy thrive. And you're now speaking in a way that gives essentially a permission slip to election deniers to believe there's some truth to something that you yourself have yet to find evidence of.
Chuck, I stand by everything I said. That was a book where 11 of the 12 chapters were dedicated to a lot of left-wing victimhood in this country, but it would have been incomplete for me not to call out my own tribe. And my point is, I don't want to see this in terms of red versus blue. We've created an incentive structure in this country, whoever you are, whatever your skin color, increasingly whatever your political affiliation, to see yourself as a victim. I refuse to see myself as a victim. Hardship is not the same thing as victimhood. We are going through hardship as a country right now, including many conservatives. Hardship is sometimes not a choice. Victimhood is a choice. And so whoever the American is that I'm talking to, I say we do not choose victimhood. We choose victory. That is who we are. And I think we can be stronger on the other side of it. So, Chuck, this isn't some game of gotcha. I stand by everything I've written over the last 3 years in the books that I have, except for a few areas on facts where, as the new facts have come up, I've changed my mind. But in the core theses, I'm in the exact place I am as when I wrote those books. But the point of the matter is, I'm not in this race to lead a political party. I am in this race to lead a nation. I'm using the Republican Party as a vehicle to advance an America First agenda that I think many Americans, most Americans can rally behind. That's what we're going to need.
One thing I want to clear up, I know you've only voted in 2 presidential elections. Where did you vote in 2020, and how did you vote?
I voted in Ohio, and during the coronavirus pandemic, I voted by mail. That's exactly how I voted. And you know what? And the fact of the matter is, I think we should have one standard for everybody. But for me, for much of my 20s, I was disaffected from politics. The fact of the matter is, I understand why young people are disaffected. I was uninspired by John Kerry and George Bush. I voted Libertarian that year, or by John McCain and Barack Obama, or Mitt Romney or Barack Obama. So I don't make any bones about that. I actually talk about it in my speeches.
And you're also uninspired by Donald Trump in 2016, right?
I was skeptical of Donald Trump in 2016. That is accurate, because I had grown up in a generation where I felt like we had been lied to. From weapons of mass destruction in Iraq to the 2008 financial bailouts, those are Republican examples, to Democrat examples of the Russia collusion hoax. So I was deeply skeptical, but I judged based on results, and I voted for him with confidence in 2020.
Vivek Ramaswamy, like I said, you became the center of the debate. We will be following your campaign as it goes on. Be safe on the trail, and thanks for coming on and sharing your views.
Thank you, Chuck. I appreciate it.
Welcome back. As America debates how old is too old to be president, the youngest candidate that's announced in the 2024 field is currently introducing himself to voters. Vivek Ramaswamy is a 37-year-old multimillionaire who graduated from Harvard College and Yale Law School. He made his fortune at a hedge fund and in biotech, and he ran an asset management company which calls itself Anti-Woke. A first-time candidate for political office, he says he has plans to start an anti-woke cultural movement.
We're in the middle of a national identity crisis. That leaves a vacuum in its wake. And when you have a vacuum that runs that deep, that is when poison fills the void. Pick your favorite one. Wokeism, transgenderism, climatism, globalism, COVIDism.
And Vivek Ramaswamy joins me now. Mr. Ramaswamy, welcome back. Actually, welcome to Sunday Meet the Press.
Thank you. Good to see you again, Chuck.
Let me start with this overall look. You've got this anti-wokeism. You've written books about this. This is your political identity as you've introduced yourself. Folks, I get it in a primary. Why are you convinced this message could actually work if you got the nomination in a general election?
I think I'm speaking as a member of my generation here, Chuck, but I think it's true of all Americans. We're all hungry for a cause right now in America. We're hungry for purpose and meaning at a point when the things that used to fill our hunger for purpose, faith, patriotism, family, hard work, these things have disappeared. I see an opportunity to revive our missing national identity. I think that's something that Americans hunger for across the political spectrum, answering what it means to be an American today. You ask people my age that question, you get a blank stare in response. I think that is the vacuum at the heart of our national soul. I'm running for president to revive the ideals that actually set the nation into motion. I think it's going to unite the country.
It's interesting. Your rhetoric can sound uniting, and your answer just now. But then you say the following things. The trans movement has become a cult. We need to abandon climate religion in America. I definitely find the idea of systemic racism revolting. I say this, how do you square those statements with unification? These are divisive times. This is a polarizing time. We're pretty evenly divided on these cultural issues. How do you unite the country when you're essentially denigrating the views of half of the country?
I don't think I'm denigrating the views of half the country. I mean, let's take the touchiest of those subjects right now on the trans issue. I think that when a kid says that I'm born into the wrong body, that my gender doesn't match my biological sex, more often than not, that is a case of a mental health disorder. That doesn't mean you disrespect that person. It means they're crying out for help. I met with two young women who regret the decisions they made, going through double mastectomies, one a hysterectomy, chemical intervention, now trying to teach kids across the country that when you're struggling inside, going through adolescence, yes, that involves some struggle. We live in a cultural moment today where adults are affirming that confusion rather than actually treating them compassionately. That's cruelty.
You ever talk to parents that have a kid who's going through this?
I have, actually.
Yeah. I mean, it's a my point
it's a difficult place to be. I acknowledge that. But what we need to do on both sides here is act with compassion, not really what makes us feel good about ourselves. And I think that's my main issue across our response to transgenderism and to climate. It's solving the actual underlying issues rather than what allows you to signal your virtue.
What makes it compassionate to pass a law that denies a parent making their own health care decision for their kid? That's the part of this. That doesn't sound very conservative and small government to me.
Well, look, there isn't a state in this union that allows you to smoke an addictive cigarette before the age of 18, that allows you to get a tattoo before the age of 18. That's a body-altering change that a kid may later regret in life. So I think it is perfectly reasonable to say that if you're after 18 years old, you're free to decide whatever you want to do. That's what it means to live in a free country. But below the age of 18, I think it's perfectly legitimate to say that we won't allow genital mutilation or chemical castration through puberty blockers for the purpose of gender transition.
But how do you know it's that? Again, how do you know, are you confident that you know that gender is as binary as you're describing it? Are you confident that it isn't a spectrum?
I am.
You know this as a scientist?
Well, there's two X chromosomes if you're a woman, an X and a Y. That means you're a man. So there's a biological basis for this.
There's a lot of scientific research out there that says gender is a spectrum.
Chuck, I respectfully disagree. Gender dysphoria for most of our history, all the way through the DSM-5, has been characterized as a mental health disorder, and I don't think it's compassionate to affirm that. I think that's cruelty. When a kid is crying out for help, what they're asking for is, you got to ask the question of what else is going wrong at home? What else is going wrong at school? Let's be compassionate and get to the heart of that, rather than playing this game as though we're actually changing our medical understanding for the last 100 years.
I go back to this. If a parent is dealing with a child that has these, that may have these issues, trust me, the last thing they want to do is consider something like this. But if that is what they think could help their child pursue happiness, or they're not to kill themselves, why take away that option? Again, why shouldn't it be up to the parent?
Well, part of why parents now suddenly feel that way, let's ask ourselves that, Chuck, is we've created a culture that teaches parents that they're being bigoted or that they're bad people if they don't actually take those steps. Part of what I think is, listen, gender dysphoria, for the rare few people who have suffered it, is a condition of suffering. My question is, why on earth are we going out of our way to create even more of it? And there's no doubt that the cultural movement in this country, even education, is creating more gender dysphoria. If it's a condition of suffering, let's not create more of it. That's that's what we're doing.
Let me ask you about the Disney dust-up with Ron DeSantis. On one hand, I assume you agree with pushing back at Disney the way Governor DeSantis has rhetorically. But is there a point where you think it is too much to use government to punish business?
Here's where Ron DeSantis really lost it here. He's gone on the wrong path. He claimed, and this part actually sounded good to me, Disney should have never had crony capitalist lobbying-related privileges in the first place. Here's the part he doesn't mention. One of those crony capitalist privileges was, and I think the most relevant one, was codified into law by none other than Ron DeSantis in 2021. Florida passed this political anti-discrimination statute, which I applauded at the time. Said if you operate internet companies, this includes streaming services like Disney does, that you can't engage in viewpoint discrimination. Now here's the funny, dirty little secret of that. They wrote into a last-minute exception into that law for anyone who also operates a theme park more than 25 acres in the state of Florida. That's crony capitalism. And so the irony is Ron DeSantis, who's now railing against crony capitalism and rolling that back, was the one who actually passed that into law for the case of Disney. So I think that undermines the credibility of his crusade. I prefer to get to root causes rather than doing political stunts.
Let me ask you about the idea of cancel culture, because I feel like the criticism that the right was making of the left 2 years ago, that it looks like some on the right are embracing cancel culture. I think Bud Light. I think about the transgender representative in Montana who was basically kicked and not allowed to speak on the floor. Do you think some of this is going too far?
I'm an opponent of victimhood culture, cancel culture, you name it. I've written a book about this. I do think that the way the culture war ends is not with a bang, but with a whimper, where both sides get infected by those same norms.
You think the right's been infected by this?
One of the things I say to conservative audiences across the country is we have to be the party of free speech and open debate. We can't be the party that says, I won't talk to, I'm here talking to you on NBC. There's other candidates in this race that say they won't talk to NBC News. Ron DeSantis is one of them. I go to college campuses where other candidates refuse to go. So I think we've got to practice what we preach. I'm in this race as a millennial, as a young person who's lived the American dream, to actually walk the walk when it comes to free speech and open debate. And yes, I would like to see other Republicans rise to that occasion and do better, starting with the debate stage in our own party this fall.
If Donald Trump doesn't do debates, will you not support him if he's the nominee?
Well, I'm not going to let him get away with that. Donald Trump...
What does that mean? What do you mean you're not going to let him get away with it? He can do what he wants to do.
I don't think the other candidates, including Donald Trump, are going to relish being on that debate stage with me. But I think that the way that he's shown in 2015, what people gave him credit for was that he was an outsider and a disruptor. I'm the outsider in this race. And I think that if you want to be part of Joe Biden in an existing establishment that doesn't want to debate, I think people are hungry for new blood.
What should the party use as leverage to force him to show up on the debate stage?
I think it's the voters. I think it is my job and it's the job of candidates to tell voters that if you want someone sitting across the table from Xi Jinping, if you want someone with the spine to take on the administrative state, it's the top of my domestic agenda, you better darn well not be scared to show up on a debate stage with the new challenger. Donald Trump did a great job of that in 2015. I'm the outsider in this race.
You have indicated you would support a 6-week abortion ban if you were a governor of a state and all of this. What would you do on a federal level? Would you create a floor?
So I believe in being principled on this, Chuck. I'm unapologetically pro-life. And in the pro-life movement, I believe that abortion is a form of murder. Murder, though, is regulated by the states, not by the federal government. I believe in the Constitution. I think Roe was wrongly decided. I've said so for a long time. This is a matter for the states, not the federal government, and I stand on principle there.
When does a fetus have constitutional rights?
So look, 6 weeks is at the end of life. When you lose brainwaves, that's our moment of death.
Where in the Constitution does it say someone has constitutional rights as a fetus?
It's not codified in the Constitution. That's why this is a matter for the states. But I do believe that I'm unapologetically pro-life, but one of the areas where we can do better in the pro-life movement is to walk the walk. Provide an easier option for women to get to yes. I support a conversation about adoption, childcare, even greater responsibility for men. I think that's how we turn this issue into being a less divisive one.
One of your big applause lines that is a bit of a head scratcher for me is defund the FBI.
Yeah.
So if you
I didn't say defund the FBI. I said shut down the FBI and replace it with something new. Yeah.
So you want to shut down the FBI? What are you replacing it with?
I think it's a new apparatus built from scratch that actually respects the law instead of making it up. And the funny thing, Chuck, is if you look at over the last...
Do you think the FBI constantly is making up the law? That is a huge charge. They just stopped major fentanyl been able to get rid of. I mean, there's a lot of work the FBI does, other than respond to complaints from elected officials who don't like investigations.
Well, I look over the course of the last 60 years. J. Edgar Hoover, what he did to Martin Luther King, that was an affront. It's still the J. Edgar Hoover FBI that people walk into down the street here in Washington, D.C. And I personally believe, as somebody who's running to actually run the executive branch of the government, when you have a bureaucracy whose culture becomes so ossified, every once in a while you need to turn it over. And I think that, yes, we need federal law enforcement, but that institution has, in a bipartisan way, become so, I think, ossified in its own norms, in its own corruption, that we need to rebuild it from scratch and have something.
So you're going to replace the FBI with a new FBI?
Well, with a new institution built from scratch to carry out federal law enforcement, because the existing FBI, the people who work there, have worked there for so long that actually they're going to be getting in their own way. I think that that's actually important. And by the way, I also support.
It does sound like you're just replacing the FBI with the FBI.
Well, the problem is there's people who have worked there for decades. And so what I say is, if I'm the U.S. president and I can't work for the federal government for more than 8 years, which I think is a good thing, then none of those bureaucrats reporting into me should either. That's the point I'm making.
All right. Vivek Ramaswamy, you bring some energy to your campaign. We'll be following it. Thanks for coming on and sharing your views with us.
It's good seeing you, Chuck. Thank you.
Former president pleading not guilty today at his historic third arraignment now on charges of trying to use his authority to stay in power. The question is, will the new charges actually change his primary opponents and the way they handle Trump on the trail? Joining me now, Republican presidential candidate Vivek Ramaswamy. Thank you for joining us this evening. Vivek, I will say, today you did announce at a campaign event that you would not actually say that Biden was legitimately elected. And I wonder why it is you are reluctant to acknowledge that.
Well, precisely what I said in New Hampshire earlier today is that big tech is actually the one that interfered with the election. There is good evidence, I'm data-driven, strong polling data that said that if that Hunter Biden laptop story had been released rather than suppressed on the eve of that election, that likely would have changed the electoral result. That is hard fact in this country. Now, from the New York Times to CNN, we'll admit that was true and grounded in fact, and a lot of corruption that was laid to bear then, that was systematically suppressed. And I think that is the single greatest form of election interference risk that we face in this election as well, is technology companies suppressing valid information that the voters need to access to make informed decisions. And I stand by that.
Well, Vivek, I'm glad you mentioned that. I'll, of course, leave it to voters to decide what was going to be the reason that they would choose a particular candidate. But because you say you are evidence-driven and you want to make sure that the voters have all the information that they need to make an informed decision about who will represent them, do you agree that it should have an opportunity, these cases against Donald Trump should have the opportunity to have airing before the actual voters? They have a decision as either the jurors or also as voters to know how they should actually select their next president.
So I want to say something very clearly. My self-interest would be to have Donald Trump eliminated from competition. I'm polling at third in the Republican national primary right now. And you know what? If Trump were out of the way, it'd be a lot easier for me. But I don't want to win this election that way. On principle, not on politics, on principle. We should not be a country where the party in power uses police force to indict its political opponents in the midst of an election. And Laura, I have a basic rule of thumb. If you are going to indict a political opponent in the middle of an election, it better darn well not be based on a novel, untested legal theory. Yet that's exactly the case in each of the three indictments. I think it is no accident that you see three independent indictments on novel legal theories coming down at the exact same time during an election. And I think that this is going to be a grave threat to public trust in the justice system going forward. I'm in this race to unite the country, and I'm sad to say that as our next president, which I expect to be, it's going to make my job that much more difficult to unite this nation when we have set this precedent of the politicization and weaponization of our justice system.
Well, 2 points. One, there's truly nothing novel about a conspiracy charge against somebody. It's something that's often charged against a variety of defendants and in and out of who have been the former president or just everyday Americans. That's why it's part of the criminal code. But on the second issue of the weaponization, do you have concerns that this talking point that is raised oftentimes about the Biden administration or the Department of Justice being weaponized? I mean, we're talking about 115 or more thousand employees of the Department of Justice, 40 separate departments and 40 separate counterparts, et cetera. You've got divisions like national security and antitrust and tax and civil rights, just to name a few. So to suggest that there is some weaponization, do you think that it would be very difficult if you, in fact, do get the responsibility to lead the executive branch, that you are beginning with the proposition that the entirety of the Department of Justice is weaponized?
So I want to respectfully disagree with the first part of what you said. This is absolutely an unprecedented legal theory. There's a Supreme Court case called Alvarez in 2012 that expressly held that a candidate for political office and a publicly elected official has a First Amendment right to engage in, yes, false speech. That's hard Supreme Court case precedent. Is that good judgment on behalf of that elected official? No, it's not. But every bad judgment is not a crime. So this is absolutely unprecedented. It is also unprecedented for the 4 co-conspirators to be attorneys who are offering legal advice. For an attorney to use a legal theory and be criminalized for it, for giving a client advice, that endangers the legal system as we know it. So my view is that many of these bureaucracies, starting with the FBI, have become corrupted at a level that is really incorrigible. That's why I've said as US president, I will shut down the FBI. We'll take the 35,000 employees, 15,000 of them that are agents doing real work on the front lines. We will reorganize them to the US Marshals, to the Drug Enforcement Agency, to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, agencies that have not been politicized. But this is an agency whose history is still dating back to the legacy of J. Edgar Hoover. It is still the J. Edgar Hoover building of the FBI that people are walking into. And the remarkable part of this is just rewind a few decades ago, it was the left, Lauren, that was actually complaining about the politicization and the unfairness of the FBI. Today, it's the right. To me, it's not a partisan issue, left versus right. That bureaucracy is a formula for corruption. And that's why, as our next president, I will shut it down.
Well, many people did not have on their bingo card that Republicans would be calling the FBI or the law enforcement entities of our nation in this fashion and disparaging them. But you will not get argument from me about the legacy of one J. Edgar Hoover, particularly as somebody who prosecuted in the Civil Rights Division. But what you will get some pushback, I think, from a great variety of people is this notion of the unprecedented nature of what we're talking about. And I want to home in yet again on this point. Conspiracy is quite a common charge to have, but also First Amendment and protected speech is something that's
conspiracy
so foundational.
To commit what, Lauren? You know better.
Well, I do know better, which is why I stated it quite precisely, that it is in fact a commonly actually charged crime, but the actual indictment does outline what the allegations are here. But my point is with respect to the protected speech. Certainly there are the Supreme Court cases that talk about the fact that protected and political speech is sacrosanct. But the notion here, they allege that it went beyond that in the form of action and conspiring to try to undermine the peaceful transition of power. And for that, I wonder, you've made it very clear that you intend and hope to be able to, if you are the President of the United States, to pardon Donald Trump. Do you think that the American people have a right, however, for the justice process to conclude before you make that statement?
So look, my assumption is that the worst statement of the facts for the defendant was exactly what you see in the indictment, in each of these 3 indictments. That's a reasonable assumption. The prosecution states its harshest case in the indictment. I've read all 3, and on all 3 of the indictments, I believe they are politicized. I believe they leverage novel legal theories. I believe if it had been anybody without the last name of Trump, they would not have brought those indictments under those circumstances. And in the interest of moving this nation forward, and yes, that will be my job as our next president, to unite our country and to move forward towards a national revival, it will absolutely be in the interests of this nation to heal and to move forward by making sure that A, we pardon Trump, and B, we avoid the precedent of this kind of politicization of the justice system. That's the clear right answer. And we can go through each of those indictments from the original one in New York, Alvin Bragg, an individual who actually pledged to run for office on the pledge of investigating this man, who brought a first-in-class legal theory, to the documents case, which failed to mention the Presidential Records Act, to now this new one, which actually criminalizes the seeking of good faith legal advice, calling that a conspiracy instead, and completely flaunting the precedent in Alvarez. It is not an accident that you see these 3 cases at the same time. And I'm sorry to say that people who have lost their trust in the justice system have lost that trust for good reason. And it's going to make my job, the next president's job, that much more difficult to rebuild it, which is what also gives me my sense of urgency to speak out, even though it's against my interest, running against Trump in this primary.
On the precedent point of it, and again, I push back quite sternly, of course, on the notion that there is something novel about a case involving some of the claims that were made, obviously, in the Mar-a-Lago classified documents, but we need not quibble about our own interpretation of an indictment. I'll leave that for jurors. But I will ask you, when you're looking at all of this and you are looking at the precedent, do you have some concerns about a precedent that you will not seek to pursue justice if you are a prosecutor against somebody simply because they are a candidate for office? Wouldn't that set an awfully dangerous precedent if we were to simply untest that? And I note, of course, Jack Smith is somebody who has been prosecuting cases against other elected officials, including some who do not have the last name Trump. I'll mention just a few: John Edwards or Bob Menendez, people in The Hague as well, and we could go on in the public integrity section as well. Do you have concerns that there is going to be a real concern and a loss of faith among the American people with respect to how they perceive our institutions if they do not even endeavor to pursue justice?
My view is that nobody is above the law, but nobody is below the law either. And you know what? Even if you just take each of these indictments, there are deeply suspect circumstances, facts, omissions of fact, and both law. And my view is there's a dual standard of justice in the United States now. I've also said as part of my campaign, I have pledged, for example, to also pardon Julian Assange. This is an individual who sits in foreign exile. Even as the person who leaked the documents to Julian Assange, Chelsea Manning, had her sentence commuted by President Obama because she's a member of a favored political class. She's transgender. Again, that's two standards of justice based on your political beliefs. Now you have one for Biden, another for Trump. This is not sustainable in our country. I think we have to have one standard of justice for all Americans. I think you and I have a deep disagreement on whether or not this indictment actually sticks to prior legal precedents. I think none of the three do. They're all novel in their own way. And I just think it's a disastrous judgment in setting not a precedent of letting political candidates go. No, as you know, plenty of political candidates who have committed cut and dry fraud claims or otherwise have appropriately been prosecuted, Menendez on down. But the reality is that in this particular case, the fact that this came in the middle of an election, the timing of this, all the cases coming at the exact same time, let's call a spade a spade. This is to stop one man from successfully holding office. That's not the way we want to do things in the United States of America. The voters should consider this information when making their judgment of how they vote, but not using the police state to eliminate competition from running. That is an awful precedent in this country. And I am worried that if we fail to acknowledge that, you know, what we saw, even on dark days like January 1st, 2021, January 6th, 2021, I worry that that will be the beginning of our march towards a national divorce. That is not where I want to see us go. I am deeply worried about it. I'm in this race to lead a national revival, but we have to be able to move on from the past to the future to do it.
I understand your position. I think President Obama would deeply disagree with your assessment of the reasons why he was motivated to commute the sentence of at least Chelsea Manning. But finally, I guess it's very clear, I don't think either of us will be a part of the jury selection process in any of these three different indictments. And if there is a fourth, somehow I think they're going to pass us over in the voir dire process. But as you say, you are evidence and data driven. So I wonder if the juries will have an opportunity to see that evidence in a trial before they make their decision at the polls. Vivek Ramaswamy, thank you so much for your time.
Entrepreneur turned political newcomer and on the rise in the GOP presidential field. This week on Firing Line.
This is the American Revolution. This is 1776.
He's just 37 years old.
USA!
Vivek Ramaswamy is the son of Indian immigrants who became a biotech entrepreneur before making a name for himself with the book Woke Inc., about why he believes corporations and social causes shouldn't mix.
Coca-Cola was among those companies that has mastered the art of blowing woke smoke.
Ramaswamy has earned a prized place on the August GOP debate stage.
Trump was actually a very good president, but he fell short of the level that I would want to see us go to.
Among Ramaswamy's policy ideas that would transform the U.S. government, eliminate the Department of Education, the FBI, and the IRS.
I will not promise you to reform those agencies. We will shut them down.
End U.S. military support to Ukraine, and require young people to pass a civics test if they want to vote before they're 25. What does Vivek Ramaswamy say now?
Welcome to Firing Line.
Thanks, I'm glad to be here.
Why do you want to be the next president of the United States?
I am worried, Margaret, that we are in the middle of this national identity crisis where my generation in particular, our generation, we're hungry for purpose and meaning and identity. And yet we hunger to be part of something bigger than ourselves, yet we can't even answer what it means to be an American. I think that loss of identity is responsible for a lot of our economic stagnation. It's part of what's actually even behind the loss of our fortitude on the global stage. And I think that I actually have a vision of what it means to be a citizen of this country because I have lived the true American dream. And I am worried that will not exist for the next generation unless we do something about it.
What qualifies you to be the next president of the United States?
So the fact that I am an outsider is, I think, an important qualification. But I bring a unique combination. I do think it will take an outsider who has executive experience, who's been a successful CEO. But to combine that, and I think this is where, for example, Trump left short, combine that with a deep first personal understanding of the Constitution itself, a deep understanding of the laws that actually empower a US president to shut down the administrative state and the federal bureaucracy that gets in the way of prosperity and liberty in this country. That's a rare combination. I bring that combination to the table. I think that's going to be required to reach the next generation of Americans, and I feel a sense of obligation to do it.
You just said Trump fell short. How did Trump fall short?
I think in many ways, and I'm learning from the foundation that he laid, the advisors that he surrounded himself with did not even allow him really to see through the agenda that he himself said he wanted to come in and see through. Draining the swamp, shutting down the deep state. Many of the people around him tied his hands.
So you're saying Trump wasn't able to fulfill his promises to the American people?
I think that he fulfilled some of his promises. To be clear, I think that my view is Trump was actually a very good president, but he fell short of the level that I would want to see us go to. We didn't solve the border crisis. I've said I would use the US military to secure the southern border. Take the Department of Education. He put a good person on top of it, Betsy DeVos. I believe an agency like that is not subject to reform. I've said that I would shut down the US Department of Education. So in many ways, I think Trump did not go far enough with the very agenda that he brought to office in the first place, and that's a big part of why I'm in this race.
The first debate
Yes.
is going to be the first time many GOP primary voters have even heard your name.
Yes.
They are very quickly going to see that you are well-spoken, that you are energetic, that you have pristine Ivy League credentials. And they're also going to realize that you have no elective experience at the state or federal level. How do you expect that they will not categorize you as a Republican version of Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg in his campaign to become president?
I think
out of
that'll
nowhere?
be easy because Pete Buttigieg and I are fundamentally different people. We're different human beings. I think what they will see much more naturally is exactly what the Republican base wanted in 2016, which was an outsider, untainted by government, independent of the donor class, and that's me. I think the rest of that debate stage will be populated by, let's call it what it is, super PAC puppets, people whose campaigns are principally funded by super PACs that are running their ads on television. I'm not bought by the donor class. I have put over $15 million of my own money into this campaign, hard-earned money on the back of my own success, and I am untainted by the constraints that come with being a career government, really professional politician. The real choice that I think the GOP faces in this primary is, do we want reform, incremental reform, or do we want revolution? I stand on the side of revolution. I think the GOP base stands on the side of the American Revolution with me. And that's a big part of why it's going to take an outsider to get that job done.
I'm going to need you to go into why we need a revolution.
We need a revival of the American Revolution and its ideals.
Which
That's
ideals?
exactly what we need. Ideals like self-governance over aristocracy. The idea that we, the people,
sort out our differences through free speech and open debate in the public square without elite interference. The ideal that it's not in the back of palace halls or three-letter government agencies that we decide the right answers to questions from climate change to racial injustice, but that the citizens do it in a constitutional republic, and we have lost that.
But are you saying revolution in the context of real violence?
No, I believe in full peace in this country. My concern, and this is my concern, is if we fail to let people speak freely, that is when they scream. If we fail to let people scream, that is when they turn to tearing things down. So I do not want to see another instance like January 6, 2021 in this country. But my concern is by failing to reckon with what actually led to events like that, we're paving the way for far worse in the future.
How are GOP, self-identified Republican primary voters going to look at what you're offering as a Trump 2.0 version, a more effective approach to delivering on Trump's original promises? How are they going to not think, you know what, he would be a really effective chief of staff for a Trump 2.0 with Trump as the president? What is going to differentiate you other than your technocratic ability to get it done?
I think that's an important element of it, but it's not the whole story. I think I'm the only person in this race, including Trump, who has the power and ability to inspire a new young generation of Americans that I think our voter base cares deeply about. About 30% of this country became psychiatrically ill when Trump was in office, started agreeing with things they would have never agreed with just because Donald Trump was saying them, started disagreeing with things that they used to agree with just because Trump is in office. And without putting blame on Trump or anybody else, I think most people understand that was just a fact from 2016 onward in this country. And for whatever reason, I'm not having that effect on people. To the contrary, we are bringing young people into this movement, new people into our pro-American movement who have never come with the GOP before. I was a guy who supported Trump. I am a guy who still respects immensely what he accomplished for this country. But America First does not belong to Trump, just as it does not belong to me, just as it didn't belong to Reagan. It belongs to the people of this country. And the question is, who's going to take that agenda further? I think it's going to be the guy with fresh legs, a deep understanding of the Constitution, the ability to win a landslide and bring young Americans with us.
Okay, so you want to bring a new generation into politics. That's a very refreshing approach. And yet, one of your key campaign pillars is raising the voting age to 25 with a civics test or military service in order to maintain the age 18 voting age.
So my premise is this. Every young kid who graduates from high school should be able to pass the same civics test that every immigrant has to pass in order to become a citizen of this country.
Amen.
At the age of 18, let's attach civic duties to civic privileges. And I say that minimal duty is either knowing something about the country, the exact same things an immigrant has to know, or else serve the country in some minimal way, first responder role or in the military. Part of reaching young people isn't just pandering by telling them what in the short term they want to hear, satisfying their moral hunger by saying, go and, what the left says, go to Ben & Jerry's and order a cup of ice cream with some social justice sprinkles on the side. No, that's not how we satisfy the hunger for purpose and meaning. I think the revival of actual civic duty is a big part of how we feed that hunger for purpose. Citizenship means something to me. And if we make it mean something to young Americans, they'll be much less drawn to secular cults from wokeism to climatism than they are today, because they actually believe that the fact that they're a citizen of the United States of America actually means something to them. And it will unite the country in the process.
You've coined this term climatism.
Yeah.
What does it mean?
I think it refers to an ideology that says we have to abandon fossil fuels and carbon emissions at all cost to stave off existential climate risks for humanity. I think that is a religious conviction. It is not a scientific conviction. So I think we have to reckon with the facts to say that are global surface temperatures going up? Yes, it appears to. That's a fact.
But because of the emission of carbon?
Because of broadly man-made causes, including but not limited to the emission of carbon, and also non-man-made causes, yes.
Is that an existential risk for humanity? No, it is not. Does that mean that we should abandon or even abate the use of carbon or carbon dioxide emissions? No, it does not in my book. I think the right question we should be asking is what advances human prosperity? That's what I care about. That's what I will care about measuring as the leader of this country, rather than obsessing over a cult of carbon.
When people point to the 101-degree water temperatures in Florida, or the heat waves throughout the country, or the unparalleled storms and climate events, how do you respond?
I respond by saying that if the same shoe fit the other foot, and you disagreed with that policy and somebody else were picking up anecdotal data from the middle of Arkansas who didn't go to Harvard, you'd be laughing them off the stage as a bunch of rubes who didn't know how to follow data based on anecdotal evidence.
Approximately half of Republican primary voters favor Donald Trump as their first choice candidate for the nomination. How do you defeat Donald Trump without contrasting yourself and making the case that Republicans should not renominate him?
Look, I'm not running from something. I'm leading us to a vision of what it means to be an American, and doing it while authentically respecting what Trump did for this country. But drawing a contrast, I mean, the contrasts are plenty. I'm less than half his age. I am the fresh outsider in this race. I have a clear, detailed vision to take on policy disputes, policy objectives that he was even unwilling to touch. So those are details, but I think they're important details. But most importantly, I think respecting his legacy and doing it authentically will allow me to be more successful in winning this nomination.
You've called for Republican candidates to pardon Trump in both of the two cases that he has been charged with, the RAG DA from Manhattan case, as well as Jack Smith's documents case from Mar-a-Lago. Recently, new charges have been added to the documents case. What's clear is that the scope of Trump's legal liability is not fully known yet, even still. So why plant the flag? Why plant the pardon flag without seeing all of the evidence that prosecutors have against him?
So I'll give you the narrow answer and I'll give you the deeper answer. The narrow answer is I would pardon him because I think that his behaviors did not obviously constitute a legal violation, even as stated in those indictments. That's the narrow answer. The deeper answer, and the one that really moves me, is that I think it will set an awful national precedent for us to become a country in which the ruling party, whoever it is, uses police power to indict its political rivals. That is the stuff of banana republics. That is not the stuff of the United States of America. I ask the question of, is any step we take as a country, is that going to take us one step closer to a national divorce, which I worry deeply about? I do not want a national divorce. I want to lead a national revival. Would this prosecution of a former president who currently is a front runner in a primary to be the next president, would that take us in the right direction or the wrong direction as a country? There is no doubt in my mind that that will take us in not only a wrong but potentially dangerous direction that will make the job of reuniting this country that much more difficult. That is what moves me.
Is there any scenario in which you believe that the officials at the Justice Department can put partisanship aside and truly administer the laws of this country apart from politics? If there were a Republican president and a Republican attorney general prosecuting Donald Trump, would that be legitimate and free from politicization in your view?
I don't think the real divide in this country is between Republicans and Democrats.
No, but answer my question.
So
is there any way to prosecute a former president without it being considered politicized in your view?
The answer would be, it wouldn't be whether it's a Republican or not. It would come down to the facts and law. I'll tell you something that would change my mind. If you told me in the documents case, there was new evidence that came out that Trump was selling those secrets for private financial gain to our foreign adversaries who are in a position to use that to compromise the U.S., that would absolutely change my position.
But obstruction is breaking the law.
Obstruction is breaking the law, but if for the same reason that entrapment, right? Entrapment would cause someone to...
Okay, but we're not talking about entrapment here.
But it's a species
we're talking about the FBI asked for documents and then he potentially destroyed camera evidence of him not giving over those documents.
So this gets into deep constitutional doctrine, which I'm happy to do. The way you're supposed to prosecute somebody, deeply ingrained in the legal tradition of this country, is that there is an actual act that breaks the law, and then you bring the person who committed it to justice, not that you pick the person and then find the violation.
I hear your passion, and you've redirected the question and the answer from
I'm not.
actually,
I'm answering your question.
from actually the circumstances of President Trump's obstruction. Bill Barr read the same indictment that you read and that I read and that America has read and called it damning. So you two just have a difference of opinion.
I'm not sure we do. I'd have to talk to Bill on that. Maybe we do, maybe we don't.
He called it damning.
Well, I have been
You don't think it's damning?
I have said it is not the basis for a legal conviction. What I have also said at every step, I'll remind you, Margaret, I'm in this race for US president, in the same race that Donald Trump is in, for a reason. I would have made different judgments than Trump made in each of those instances. Very different judgments. But I think there is a fundamental difference between a bad judgment, which is an issue for the voters to take into account as they wish to, where we the people decide who leads the country, versus using criminal procedures to eliminate someone from competition in that election and eliminating the ability of the voters to make that decision for themselves.
If President Trump were to be convicted by a jury of his peers in Florida, a jury pool that is much more likely to be sympathetic to Donald Trump than not, would you still feel the need to pardon him?
I would, because it would be important to move this country forward. As I said, if the facts are dramatically different, we're talking about selling secrets to foreign adversaries, for example, I would change my judgment on that. But on these facts, there's no doubt that I will pardon Donald Trump because I think that's the right thing for the country.
Okay. You have called the potential indictment of Donald Trump around January 6th, quote, a dangerous precedent for the political weaponization of police power in this country. If prosecutors have evidence of the former president committing crimes in an effort to overturn a free and fair election, isn't that also a dangerous precedent not to hold that person accountable?
There's a lot baked into your question. You used the word crime. If there are clear evidence in support of a crime, I always support accountability. But the question is, it begs the question of, was there a crime?
After January 6th, you were critical of Donald Trump's conduct. But you also maintain that January 6th riots at the Capitol were not his fault. You have said that censorship by big tech companies contributed. Help me understand, are you saying that if Donald Trump hadn't spent 2 months promoting baseless election fraud conspiracy theories and encouraging his supporters to show up and march on the Capitol on January 6th, the riots still would have happened anyway?
That was the final catalyst. It was not the cause. The underlying cause was the frustration of people across this country. So that pent-up frustration, yes, boiled over on January 6th. But my concern, Margaret, is if we haven't actually addressed that underlying problem and cause yet, it will as yet still boil over in other ways that we are yet to see.
Do you think that Trump is addressing those underlying concerns, or do you think that he is aggravating them?
I am in this race because I am best positioned to address those underlying concerns. Margaret, I'm a candidate for U.S. president looking to lead this nation in a race where Donald Trump
But
is
you're
running.
running against
Yes, and
Donald Trump?
we spent 30 minutes talking about Donald Trump. I would prefer to talk about our vision for the nation. I would have made dramatically different judgments than Trump did. Were Trump's judgments that he made in the lead up to January 6th good for this country? No.
With respect, the reason that we're talking about what Donald Trump did, right or wrong, is because he is leading in the polls. And so I'm trying to draw out a contrast and understand what responsibility you feel he has for the violence that happened that day.
I don't think he's legally responsible for the violence that day. I do believe that we go further as a country when we do it based on first principles and moral authority, not just vengeance and grievance. That is what I'm bringing to the table.
Okay, your proposal to end the war in Ukraine,
yes,
many say would embolden Putin. If the U.S. were to withdraw military support from Ukraine, cede the Donbas region to Russia, and pledge not to admit Ukraine into NATO, Putin would be rewarded for his aggression. Wouldn't the defeat of Putin actually best be the way to rupture the no limits pact between China and Russia rather than giving Putin what he wants?
No, I don't think so. And I think that this is an area where we have deep-seated disagreement even within the Republican Party on this question.
So explain why this wouldn't embolden Putin.
I don't think that whether this would embolden Putin or not is even the right first question to ask. The right first question to ask is what advances American interests? The top military threat we face is the Russia-China alliance. Our top adversary today is Communist China. And so, no, I do not think it should be a U.S. policy objective to defeat Vladimir Putin or drive regime change in Russia. I think the top goal of the U.S. should be to ensure peace and security for Americans, foremost, and that happens when we have peace and stability on the global stage. I also do not believe that Ukraine is some model paragon of democracy. It is not. And so I think that the idea that we're retrofitting this into a battle between good and evil is just fundamentally incorrect, which means we have to look at this as realists.
If we were to follow your plan vis-a-vis Ukraine and Russia, what message would China take away? And how would that plan deter China from then invading Taiwan?
The answer is, right now, Xi Jinping believes that the U.S. won't want to go to war with two allied nuclear superpowers, Russia and China, at the same time. So Xi Jinping's bet is that with Russia in his camp, he's in a strong position should he want to invade Taiwan. If Russia is no longer in his camp, then Xi Jinping will have to think twice before going after Taiwan. That is how we deter communist China from going after Taiwan while avoiding war over it in the South China Sea, while in another one fell swoop, ending the war in Ukraine and pulling American resources back. That's realist foreign policy, not the foreign policy neoconservative dogma that now pervades, frankly, both political parties.
You came to prominence with your critiques of woke capitalism. You wrote a book, Woke Inc. Explain what woke capitalism is.
Sure. So I'll start with what wokeism is. It is a worldview that says that your identity is based on your race, your gender, your sexual orientation, or other genetically inherited attributes, that we are either oppressors or oppressed based on those genetic characteristics, and that it is our obligation to reorder those injustices and social relationships. Woke capitalism is the extension of using capitalism, commerce, as a means to address those injustices, racial injustice and climate change. I think that this is a mistake on two counts. One is I think it actually leads companies to be less successful over the long run. Milton Friedman made that case. I've made a revised case of it in my book. Margaret, that's not even my main reason for being against it. My main reason for being against this trend of stakeholder capitalism, what you could also refer to as woke capitalism, is that it is a perversion of how a constitutional republic, a democratic society, is supposed to work. What the model of stakeholder capitalism calls for is to say that no, we the people can't be trusted to sort out our differences on climate change or on social justice, but that we have to actually trust an enlightened group of elites to determine for the rest of society what the right answers are to those questions, using commerce as a vehicle to do it. And so you want to talk about threats to democracy? I think that's pretty high on the list, actually. And that's been the source of my criticism over the last several years.
In your arguments against woke capitalism, you have cited the writings of economist Milton Friedman. Friedman appeared several times on the original firing line with William F. Buckley Jr.
Yeah. Okay.
And here he is. Take a look.
We have an overblown, overgrown government spending more than 40% of our income, supposedly for our benefit, mostly waste and mostly restricting our freedom. And as a result, we have destroyed a sense of individual responsibility and responsibility to one another. Now everybody takes it for granted that if there's a problem, the government's going to take care of it.
So Friedman there is talking about how government crowds out the civic space and the social space. But you write in your book, Woke Inc., how also capitalism has inherently invasive qualities. And you argue that the answer is to, quote, build protective walls around the things we cherish most, like democracy.
I think that's actually deeply aligned with Milton Friedman's view, is that there's different spheres of our lives. I think part of what we've lost in our country is the integrity of each of those spheres of our lives. And part of the reason why is we've blurred the boundaries between them. One of those boundaries we've blurred is between our civic space and our space as capitalists. And I think that, as I said in one of my books, we don't want democracy and capitalism to share the same bed. What we actually need is a clean divorce. And I think that will revive the integrity of both capitalism